You lost weight? Beautiful.
Changed the diet a little bit. Mostly it's the booze, I think. I'm cutting that. I was telling Danny that just mornings are more productive without it. But it's mostly, it's a baby thing. It's not...
So you don't want a whiskey?
You know, I was going to bring... No, but I was going to bring you this Latvian balsam shit that I brought last time. And I remembered in the airport, I'm like, oh, I gave him some last time. I needed to check first if he's drank it. I'm sure you haven't.
I don't think we ever drank that.
Are we recording now? Is this in?
Yeah, we're recording.
Okay. Did I tell you the time I drank Latvian vodka?
No.
I ended up in Lithuania watching a basketball match.
No, you did tell me this actually at Honey Badger. You did tell me.
Fuck, man.
You ended up buying tickets, I think, to Eurobasket on accident or something?
No, my Lithuanian neighbor who moved in, he bought them, and I had no memory of the night. And then I woke up in the morning, and my ex-wife, my wife, fiance at the time, said, "Oh, you agreed to go to Lithuania to a basketball." And I was like, "Really?" No. Better go and tell him anyway. And literally, as I knock on the door, he said, "I got the tickets." I'm like, "Oh, yay!" So 2 weeks later, I flew to Latvia, got picked up at the airport, driven to Sholi, and we went to a basketball match.
Nice.
And I got my Letoiva shirt upstairs.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I mean, like, my wife is Lithuanian. Obviously, I'm Latvian American, so I have some unique connections, I guess, to the Baltics and also to the U.S. But like, anytime we can promote the Baltics is good. They're good people there.
Well, so we have a lot of Lithuanians here. Whenever I meet somebody and they're like, I'm like, "Where are you from?" They're like, "Lithuania." I'm like, "Oh, Labas." And they're like, "What? The fuck? How do you know that?" That's the only word I know.
It's some gross booze, though. Both the Trys Devinys, which is the Lithuanian sort of spirit, the liquor, and the Latvia's balsams, black balsams, which is a intimidating name. But, like, the Queen of England used to import it. And
really?
It's something, well, that's what they say. I'm sure she took one bottle or something by charity, but, like, it's the worst tasting thing. It's like bad Jägermeister. It's like Jägermeister that's not sweet at all. Tastes like bad cough syrup, but this is their drink, so they have to promote it. It's funny.
Well, I didn't drink for the first 44 days of this year, and then I did. It's Danny's fault.
Yeah. For me, it's the baby.
Oh, it's a baby.
Yeah.
Good on you. Well, actually, did I feel any? The only difference I felt is I didn't physically feel different, but I just got more shit done.
Yeah. Mornings are easier.
Mornings are easier. And then, then I bought a bar, so I'm gonna definitely have a drink again. But
good
yesterday,
for you, man.
This guy turns up and he's like, "Oh, I got a gift for you." And it's like burnt ends. I was like, and I tried it. I was like, "I taste a little bit like Scotch, but it's a bourbon." And I looked at it; it was a mix. It was a blend of rye and Scotch, which is interesting. And then so
there's a really good
restaurant
in Singapore called Burnt Ends. I don't know if that's related, but
what's to do with the steak, right? Burnt ends. That's what you had. You had a burnt ends burger, didn't you, recently?
Yeah, it's like a bit of barbecue.
Yeah. Anyway, brother, good to see you.
Likewise. Good to be here.
We often talk about the same thing. We often talk about base money. And there's a lot been going on since I last saw you.
In the banking world.
Yeah, I do wonder, one time we're going to meet up and just go, yeah, everything's broken now.
Yeah.
Everything's fucked.
Yeah.
What are we going to talk? We can't talk about base money because it's just dead. Like, what are we going to talk about?
Well, this is why you focus on base money, and the system itself is too co-opted, it's too centralized, and this is why it's important to make the distinction and why Bitcoin is base money. But no, I was telling Danny, on the train ride up here, I was thinking, it's Good Friday, Easter weekend. I'm totally interested in, like, pontificating in the big historical picture as well, and where we've been going, about banking and money and everything else, because obviously things look bleak, but I don't feel that way personally because of my holdings in Bitcoin, my show talking about this stuff is I try to marry, some of the historical banking things with Bitcoin and why Bitcoin is a better money. It's a better base money. It can be better for the banking system. So I feel pretty good about all of that. It's just, in the interim, of course, everybody is always curious and wondering how that's going to shake out. And yeah, you don't want there to be, like, blood in the streets and pandemonium. I certainly don't want that. I think there are some Bitcoiners that maybe do want that, as far as the revolution coming quick and fast and crazy.
Well, I don't. And listen, I've done everything I can to tell everyone I know, warn them about the risks of the traditional banking system and the decisions our governments and central banks are making. I've told friends till they're blue in the face, no one will listen. Some people listen, but a lot won't. But But on a personal level, I am comfortable in that I have Bitcoin, I have my protection. I've been in long enough now that I have that security of a full cycle, which is some nice personal security to have. I feel a lot more comfortable if the accusations of Choke Point 2, Operation Choke Point 2, didn't feel so real.
Yeah.
I feel if these psychopaths want to destroy the banking system, fine, it's not good, but please leave my lifeboat alone. This is my choice as a human, as a partly free man, to be able to say, okay, I don't like what you've done there. I want to park some money here and protect myself. That now to be attacked to the point where you think, are you literally a psychopath trying to force me to use your broken, corrupt system? That is the one bit that's frustrating me more than anything.
Yeah, I think they are, but that's the history of banking right there. If followers of mine, listeners of mine as well, like they should know that I'm always trying to promote the old good system of free banking. I'm a big fan of that. Bitcoin can perfectly fit into that. But I make no, I'm not disillusioned into thinking that free banking itself has failed. I mean, we have a central bank in every country around the world, or some monetary authority, as they're called. Every nation is either using the dollar or captured by some major currency, and that's the history of money and banking. Unfortunately, the systems that were free, and there are many. I mean, in every continent, Iceland, Scotland, Sweden, Canada. Those are some of the more famous examples, but there were plenty of free systems, and they worked really well for hundreds of years. Every time the government got involved, every time the central bank got involved, things kind of went to shit. And that's obviously the thing to be wary of. But at the same time, even though you can promote ideas of freedom and free banking, and I always like looking at that history, which I think we can talk some more about today, the central bank always does more in the name of stability, price stability, in the name of elasticity of the currency, being flexible for the currency. That's the same trope that they roll out again and again and again. And that's the same exact thing that we're seeing right now. We need more flexibility in the banking system. And again, it's an age-old thing. So even though I think that, if you looked at, Good Friday again, if you look at the depths of Dante's Inferno, the seventh circle of hell,
Jesus,
it's like legal tender laws and central banking. It's the legal tender being that they control the money, central banking, they control the credit. And those are the two things that even free banking, which has been really good in certain countries in the past, and we can talk about some examples because I always think they're interesting and enlightening, even though free banking really worked in the past, it has always failed eventually because, as Milton Friedman said, there's always an unholy alliance between the do-gooders on the one side and the special interests on the next. So on the other side. So some things fail, some things break, something happened. Obviously, we need more regulation. We need something else. And this is in any industry, as we know. There's, we could talk about schools, we could talk about guns, we could talk about whatever. But in banking, we are at peak central banking at the moment. The only thing more peak would be a nationalization of the entire system, and no other bank, full CBDCs, a banking app on your phone. The central bank's basically controlling all the retail money. Did you spend too much on alcohol this week? Did you not? Did you reach your quota of spending this week in general?
That's the trajectory that it feels like we're heading on.
Yeah. But again, this is why we need Bitcoin. This is why I'm so optimistic about Bitcoin, because it's an escape hatch. And I think it's more than an escape hatch. A lot of times in Bitcoin land where, we like to call ourselves classical liberals or libertarians or free market thinkers or voluntarists. But Bitcoin is definitely, you've had progressive socialist Bitcoiners on your show. I can't think of any example in libertarian thought or classical liberal thought that has been more permeating through society than the invention of Bitcoin. It's not just, it doesn't matter your political affiliation. It doesn't matter if you like free banking or if you think fractional reserve banking is evil, which it's not, but we can talk about that if you want. But, it doesn't matter because Bitcoin has permeated through that. That's, I don't know, these stigmas in certain groups where like, I'm not going to hang out with that group, or they don't have my values, or this and that. Like Bitcoin is for everyone, and it's base money, and you should understand the difference.
Well, so I find the rise of the progressive Bitcoiner really interesting. And we've had some on our show. We're seeing this cohort building up. And the range of issues they're discussing are really interesting, but I think their draw to Bitcoin is probably similar to everyone else's, is that I think they also recognize that the political system is broken.
Yeah.
I think a lot of progressive I speak to privately say the ultra-progressive left do not reflect them and the way they see the world, and it's become an embarrassment. Yet it's become weaponized by corporations, become weaponized by the government. And I think they are also seeing Bitcoin not so much just as a monetary option, but also just seen as a something to anchor to that breaks you away from peak centralization of everything.
Yeah.
And so drawing these progressive Bitcoiners and these conservative Bitcoiners together and getting them around a table, they probably agree on a lot more than they think.
Yeah. And, they say this in politics, right? I mean, most people are middle of the road. Like at the end of the day, it's the middle of the road. It's the regular people that kind of can point any election into, and this is why you have, like typically in the US, for example, our famous two-party system where we go Democrat, then we go Republican, then we go back to Democrat. Like no one, of course, figures it out. But it's the people in the middle of the road that become disillusioned with the one party and then they go back and forth. But at least and Switzerland is very good at this as well. Switzerland is even better. You never let the hardliners take control. It seems like there's maybe more risk of that in certain times and places in the last couple of years, maybe even in the US in certain parts. But you certainly never want to let the hardliners take control. I mean, we saw that in the 20th century. So, yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. I mean, where I'm from, as we said, the Baltics. Like, I mentioned it the last time I was on your show, the good old Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Actually, I saw Isabella Kaminska, who was a recent guest. Yeah. I didn't know that she was in Poland or did work in Poland.
Yeah, we love her. She's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't actually know she was kind of moderate or like pro to Bitcoin either. I haven't read her in a while, but back in the day, wasn't she not favorable to Bitcoin? We don't have to go on that.
I mean,
tangent,
she possibly, but I think most people who first discover are favorable, especially journalists.
Yeah,
because you can come at it with a little bit of cynicism, and I mean, even Saylor was. He's now the biggest bull.
Yeah. But she was pretty critical of Bitcoin in the past, definitely. Yeah. But like her worldview, she's a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
And I thought that was one of my favorite interviews we've done in ages.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's so smart. And her understanding of history and how history repeats itself, which is something I think is super important for Bitcoiners, because I think some people have this kind of worldview where they think they want it to go, but they haven't really looked at the historical context. Yeah. I mean, those who claim to be anarchists, I don't think really have had a look at the historical context when you have a breakdown in society and a collapse of government, what that actually means, especially for women in society. It usually means a lot of theft, rape, murder.
Yeah.
And that's not a world I want to, that's not the Bitcoin world I want to head towards. So there's a high risk of that. She has a great contextual understanding of how governments collapse, revolutions happen, and it was great to talk to her about that. And I think she's mixed in well with the Bitcoin community. I actually have a really weird connection to it. It's so funny. When I was 23, this guy got in touch with me and said to me, do you want to, I heard you're into web design, do you want to set up a business with me in London? I did. Yeah. Then I met Isabella. That same guy is now her business partner. It's like this really weird connection.
Nice.
But no, I think she's great. I think more people like coming in, rational people like her, rational journalists who have good understanding of history coming into Bitcoin, I think are going to be a useful lens to progress us past this libertarian Bitcoin world. And I'm not against libertarianism. I think they've got great ideas, but this kind of like rational voice of how this fits into the current world, I think is useful.
Yeah. And just to go back to the Poland point, and it's a point about Ukraine, and we don't have to go too deep into this. Your show, of course, we can continue on if you want, or go back to the money topics. But, she mentioned Poland on your show being a very famous, this was a very unique part of Europe, which a lot of people don't know about. It's actually an extremely tolerant part of Europe. the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It was a Baltic. It was an elective type of a monarchy. They had a king, but like when the king was dead, the king was dead. It wasn't like a major hereditary thing. It was, they would elect the king, and also we didn't have to go on all this. But it was a very tolerant society. It included Poland, Lithuania, parts of Latvia, all of Belarus, and all of Ukraine. Not all the eastern part of Ukraine, was mostly not, which is where much of the war is today. But that whole society was completely overlooked, I think, by like most people. We didn't even study it when I was growing up, when you were growing up, because a lot of the history is only now being uncovered because it was trapped behind the Iron Curtain. Poland, obviously, you know, Czechoslovakia, the Baltics, everybody was behind the Iron Curtain there. So not a lot of the good history was coming out. And people just didn't care as much. You know, you thought about the Western monarchs, you know, you thought about all that stuff. But I do think that the stuff that's going on in Europe, like the borderline fascist stuff that Russia's doing. I mean, Russia has deported over 1 million people. This is a fact from last year. I don't even know the latest statistic. They've deported over 1 million people, like hundreds of thousands of children, to Russia at this moment. Deported. It's genocide.
Yeah, well, that is actually in contravention of the contravenes the Geneva Convention. Yeah. It's one of the most important rules within the.
It's genocide. Yeah. It's the same thing that my ancestors dealt with. I have a family picture of, you know, it's like my second cousins, but there was like 8 kids all deported by the Soviets to Siberia. Some made it back, some died there. There were 2 deportations, one in 1941, which was the most brutal. It was the end of the Soviet reign. Then the Nazis came in, and then the Soviets came back, did another deportation, which wasn't as brutal. It was mostly just like hard labor. But the one in the early 1940s was very bad. It was bad for like the Polish intelligentsia. Of course, the Jews as well suffered horribly. But the point I just wanted to make about all this was like, you can very quickly slip into the extremes. And I think that people don't quite recognize how easily that is. And my part of the world saw the worst of it. I mean, the Holocaust was in Eastern Europe. All the camps were there. Hitler's Lebensraum. They didn't want to have camps in Germany where Germans, you know, could see them. Like it's dangerous stuff. And, you know, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, it was the most tolerant part of the world. You know, the UK kicked Jews out, I think at some point, like 1200 or something. Spain, because of they wanted them to be Catholic, they left. So a lot of Jews found themselves in Poland. This is a famous thing. It's not unknown, like thousands of years, 1,000 years, I should say. 1,000 years, Jews were in Poland. And living peacefully, and then all of a sudden, you know, you get some crazy fascist dictator who's in conjunction with another crazy fascist dictator, Stalin. Hitler obviously being the one that famously killed 6 million Jews, but Stalin killed more people in general. They come together, they start World War II. And like, this is where I just hate all of the Muscovite Russian history. They don't admit it. They never admitted any of the occupations in the Baltics. They never admitted taking over Poland as being something that was bad or cruel. But this goes back 200 years for us. So like we can finish this topic, but
keep going, man. I'm good.
For like 500 years, this Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which is like an elected monarchy, they had rights. There's a historian I'm been reading actually lately because I'm interested more in this, especially during the Ukraine stuff. His name's Robert Frost, not that Robert Frost. He's even making the case. This goes back to what I was saying about this stuff being uncovered more recently. He's making the case that it was even kind of a republic, what was going on here, where you had empires and kingdoms in Western Europe. This was a republic. You had people coming to the table voting, and you had local courts, everything. Jews as well. They had you know, it was called the shtetl. It was little Jewish towns where, unfortunately, they were still discriminated there, where they couldn't own land, like to farm. But they weren't farming people. They were more like bankers, and they were actually invited in to help with banking in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. And so it's this very interesting history. And, you know, peacefully lived there for 500 years. And in the 20th century, 1,000 years they were there, but the Commonwealth was 500 years. That's those two different dates. And then the 20th century happens, and it just all goes to shit. And, you know, just hysteria, people blaming different groups, not tolerant. I think that there's a pattern there. Timothy Snyder, interestingly, he's like the best historian on this. He has a book. It's called Black Earth. He has another book called Bloodlands. It's incredibly depressing about this time. But in Black Earth, he makes the case that it was actually the destruction of the states that caused the Holocaust. So the destruction of the Baltic states, the destruction of the Polish state, like the actual nation itself lost its identity. And so, that's why, we couldn't stop it. We couldn't stop it anyway. We didn't have the guns and the tanks. But, it was still mostly Germans that were carrying it out. But you had local collaborators, you had Polish collaborators and stuff, because, this goes back. I'm even seeing just tragic things on Twitter from Ukrainians where in some of these lands that were occupied and now they're free, like in Kherson, where there's like a shopkeeper. He's got 2 kids in the basement. The Russians are occupied the area upstairs, and he has a grocery store, and they tell him he has to open the grocery store and feed for the, provide for the soldiers and all this. And he's like, I need someone to watch my kids. And they said, I'll shoot the kids if you don't do this. And it's just absolute terror. And I don't think he's a collaborator. He's someone who's clearly coerced. But, these lines get grayer and grayer and grayer. The more that you lose your sovereignty, you lose your property rights, you lose your identity. And it's just a tragic, tragic history. And anyway, the reason I brought it up is this has been going on for like 200 years in Eastern Europe. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth actually ended in 1800. Catherine the Great, she said Poland should be wiped off the face of the map. In 1800, she said this, 1795. Poland was actually divided up 3 times, Poland and Lithuania, up until, did I say 1895? 1795. And the same exact thing was said by Hitler and Stalin in the 1940s. Said Poland, it really wasn't a state. It didn't exist. They had no history. They said the same thing about the Baltics. So, this is like the serious stuff. This is why, it's interesting. My 2 interests, basically this Eastern European history and also money, they're kind of coming, they're all, interesting things to study these days. We can get back to the money stuff. But as far as, the crazy fascist dictatorial stuff, we've seen this story before. And it's interesting what Timothy Snyder says. He says when you have a full destruction of the state, that's what really, the nation, that's what laid the grounds for the Holocaust.
When you say destruction of the nation, how do you mean?
Like literally the same thing that Catherine the Great said. Like Catherine the Great said, no more Poland. The name Poland should never be returned. The exact same words were like echoed by Hitler and Stalin. They said, they took over the state completely. There's another thing. There's more points that he makes here. So like Estonia was part of this. They were also captured by the Soviets. There was 3 occupations for us. It was first the Nazis came in. Soviets took over a little part of Eastern Europe. First the Nazis and the Soviets came in and divided Poland. Poland fell in like a month, September 39. The Baltics, we fell a year later to the Soviets. Soviets came in first. Then Hitler double-crossed Stalin, Operation Barbarossa, which this is like the glory of Russia now. They say like, oh, we stopped Hitler. You teamed up with him to start World War II. They never admit this. So then the Nazis were in the Baltics, carried out more Holocaust atrocities all over Eastern Europe at this time. This was during World War II, the 4 years. And then the Soviets came back, pushed the Nazis out, took over all of Eastern Europe, and we took West Germany, the Allies, that is, UK, France, and Britain. Germany was obviously totally destroyed. And this is another thing. The German state was completely denazified. It literally was. And the ironic thing, remember what Putin said when he rolled in a year ago? He said they need to be denazified and demilitarized. He's speaking in the most psychological, what's the term?
Pertinent?
Psychoanalytical. No, he's in denial. This is the exact thing that needs to be happening to them. But that's not what's happening. And this goes to how the Nazis actually had a hard time in Western Europe. They occupied France, they occupied Denmark, parts of Norway. They didn't really occupy Sweden. They managed to stay neutral. But there's a story, which Timothy Snyder also says this as well. 99% of Jews died in Estonia. 99% of Jews survived in Denmark. And his main point is that there actually was due process for Jews there. They had citizenship, they had rights, and it was still like a normal country. We didn't have a normal country. We were neutral. We weren't allied with, same with Poland. The Baltics and Poland, we suffered the most. Besides the Jews, which suffered the most, obviously, 50% of their population. Poland lost 20%, and we lost 15%. We were absolutely the most desecrated countries, and there literally was no state. So that's what I mean when there's no state. Like 99% of Jews in Estonia murdered, gone. 99% of Jews in Denmark survived.
So you mean when you talk about state, you talk about infrastructure, institutions.
Yeah. And he makes that point. Now, again, like people are maybe listening to this show going to think like, oh, you're defending the state. I'm just saying what I've read, and this is how history has worked in the 20th century. You know, he also makes the point that actually diplomats, interestingly, got a lot of Jews out. The Japanese, no less, got a lot of Jews out of Lithuania on diplomatic cover.
Well, so this is one of the interesting things where I get confused, or I feel challenged with libertarians in that there is this desire for more freedom, and their ideas of more freedom is the reduction or perhaps even the removal of the state. But it is the establishment of the state and strong institutions which actually has brought more freedom to the world. It is those with where there are weak institutions or authoritarian states which have the less freedoms. And so you always risk with weak institutions ended up with less freedom. We've seen that in Turkey right now. We've seen it in many countries that have established strong democracies when the institutions have been weak and you've had tyrannical leaders come in, that you've had the destruction of freedoms. So the destruction of the institution risks giving wrong people more power that actually destroys freedoms. And that's what I always worry about. It's not that I love the state or I worship the state. I've got many, many reasons to be critical, especially here in the UK, but I can still go down to Downing Street and I can protest.
Yeah,
I can write certain things. Yes, we have defamation laws, which aren't great in this country, but I can still write critical pieces, fact-based critical pieces. If I do that in Russia, you might end up with a bullet in the back of your head, or tortured or poisoned. If you criticize the state outside of Russia, you might have assassins find you and poison you. You might be on a plane and have a cup of tea and end up poisoned. So
that was the MO before the Germans started the gas chambers, but the shot to the base of the neck, that was the Russian way to kill you.
Yeah, so then I find this is where I get the real challenge in with Bitcoin. It's like, I know there's plenty of reasons to be critical of the West, especially everything that's happened in Iraq. You know, we can't undo that. That was a huge black mark on our nations.
Yeah, totally.
But at the same time, it is very clear that Vladimir Putin is a psychopathic dictator who is happy to see the deaths and rape and murder across Ukraine and potentially other states. And the only support he has is from other dictators, such as Lukashenko in Belarus and Xi Jinping in China. Like, these are the axis of evil. And I just find it maddening when we discuss these subjects from a Western liberal democracy, that people rationalize some reason for what Putin's doing. And this was a war at a time. There was no need for war.
Yeah.
There was peace. Yes, there were some border disagreements, but at peace. And so I just find it absolutely maddening. And I look at these people and I think, we agree so much on money, and then your entire worldview, I just see it differently.
Yeah. And I realize that perhaps the audience that we might be talking to here on your show as well. And I understand, I've heard a lot of your battles as well that you've had with guests and even amongst yourselves, like internally debates, which I understand completely. I don't think there's like an easy answer for that. And I love talking about anarcho-capitalistic theory. I like David Friedman's writings about anarcho-capitalist history and societies. Like, he's written a lot about medieval Iceland and places that had basically free markets and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, where we are in 2022, I'm just saying, for me personally, for us personally in Eastern Europe and the Baltics, it doesn't matter at all. All that matters is we stop the war in Russia, Russia's war on Ukraine, and we stop murdering, raping, and deporting children and Ukrainians. It is literally a playbook from World War II. There was more articles that just came out that was, they've seen documents of all this stuff. And again, when they literally thought they were going to take it in 3 days, he was so misinformed. All the generals were coming in with their regale, like their parade gear as well, because they thought it was going to be like 3 days and then they'd be doing parades. That's literally what they thought. They're so delusional.
And we're 1 year in now?
More than.
Yeah.
And so it's absolute devastation. And for us, like, these are the things we've been warning the West for 20 years. And I agree with you completely. This is another thing. People always say, what about us and what about Baby Bush? This was the war of my time growing up in college, right? Like, I was as anti-Baby Bush and tricky Dick Cheney as you could be. I mean, it was obvious that this, there were Saudis that attacked the towers. We don't need to rehash all this, but it was obvious. And, we go into Afghanistan, we go into Iraq, just left Afghanistan, Iraq, there's girls in school now, which is good. But I mean, like the point was not, it was not good that we went in. Those were occupations. We only went in with Great Britain by our side, by the way. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of the United States.
Who I consider a war criminal.
Yeah.
And he went against the consensus of the nation.
Yeah.
Yes, he had political support within Parliament, but
because he was the Prime Minister of the United States.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, we had
macabre joke. I'm just waiting for your reaction there.
Well, yeah, no, I understand your point, but I always try to remember I think there were 3 politicians who stood down. Claire Shaw, I'm pretty sure, stood down. I think Jack Straw might have stood down. There was another one. I could be wrong with Jack Straw, but for a politician to quit Parliament over that, even one is a huge deal. We had the largest protest in the country, over 1 million people protested in London against war. None of us wanted us to go into it. We all knew we were being lied to. But
they did it.
But they did it, and it's happened. It does. I'm against that. We don't need to rehash that as some post-rationalization for what Putin's doing. They're both wrong.
You should be on our side then, if we're talking about freedom in Europe, right? I mean, like, not repeating the mistakes of the 20th century. Like, be anti-Baby Bush and be anti-Daddy Putin. I mean, both are bad. Both are just degenerate. Like, just the most awful things about us, if you would believe that.
Did you find them?
Yeah. Claire Shaw, Robin Cook, Andrew Wilkie, Dennis, I don't know how you say his surname, and Matthew Parris.
So there were 5.
5 of them, yeah.
Robin Cook was the other one I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
So I find it frustrating. I find it really demoralizing at times. But quite interestingly, we interviewed this guy, Ahmed Gatnash.
Gatnash, yeah.
So he runs a human rights organization that tries to push for better human rights across the Middle East. And he was connected to Jamal Khashoggi because they were working on Arabic Twitter, which is plagued with propaganda using specific technologies that have come out of Israel. Ironically, governments such as Saudi plague and disseminate so much propaganda amongst Arabic Twitter, it's become almost useless. And so they were working with Twitter to try and make it a little bit more useful. But he was connected to that. But he spent a lot of time just explaining the volume of propaganda that's distributed on social media channels from these nation states. And I can only assume, as I have probably been captured by certain propaganda at times, that these people are being captured by propaganda that's coming out of Russia.
Yeah.
That's all I can assume. They've built an anti-West position because the amount of freedom they have in their country is not enough. They want more, or because of the mistakes that Baby Bush or Clinton or Obama or whoever's made. They've just become anti their own nation, that they've become susceptible to Russian propaganda.
Yeah. I still try to make the disclaimer, and I think we should always do this when we talk about governments that are out of control. Like it doesn't have to mean the people. I think the people do get, at some point, like happened in World War II, you didn't have to go to Eastern Europe if you were a German soldier, but they ended up going. Okay, so they did. So we need to analyze that. Jordan Peterson talks about that. We need to talk it got out of control. All right, it did, which is horrible for us. And it's still, Ukraine is still suffering from that. Was, again, my original point why I brought Poland and the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in, because this were generally a prosperous part of Europe that was free for 500 years. But anyway, what was my second point with that? Maybe I'll come back to it. But I had a follow-up to that.
Should we talk about money?
Yeah. No, well, let's stick with this just 1 second, because I wanted to...
Please do. I know how important it's to you, because this is the other thing, is that I see all these...
Oh, I got it.
Cool.
Okay, so I generally make the disclaimer, like, I'm not talking about Russians, I'm not talking about Germans, I'm talking about Washington, Berlin, and Moscow. Okay,
yes.
It's clear that now Beijing has entered the fray. and is here to stay. It's clear. Like, there are no communists in North Korea. There's just people that are trapped, good people that are trapped by a tyrannical dictator. This is clear. We should all understand this, like not talk around it, not beat around the bush, not act like it's not real. The tyrannical policies come from the top. We should remember that, absolutely. And we are fallible. Like, we have done this in the West. We did it with Iraq and Afghanistan, as we just said. But it's just clear that this is what they're doing. They're trying to destroy a state, genocide, and we're not going to stop fighting. If anything, I'm more encouraged over the last year, actually, because of, number one, Ukrainians' resolve, their individual resolve and their collective resolve is incredible. Number two, Finland just got into NATO. So here's this old argument: it was all NATO's fault. I'm waiting for the Russian tanks to line up on the Finnish border of 1,000+ kilometers with Russia. I'm waiting, dear Putin sympathizer. Please, let's see now. If it was all about NATO, Finland, the largest reserve army in Europe, 500,000+ people, because they know their neighbor. I'm waiting for the Russian tanks to just line up along Finland's border, because it's all about NATO, isn't it? It's not about NATO, obviously. It's about Ukraine and a dictatorial asshole. But anyway.
No, but I think you make a really good point. The distinction between the people and Moscow and
the capital,
London,
the
Berlin.
capital.
Yeah, the capital. I think you make a really important distinction. I find the whole thing is so depressing. But then there's the flip side where I feel really conflicted with, I see a lot of Americans criticize it, mainly on the conservative right, but critical of the support, the military support, financial support that's been given to Ukraine.
I can speak to that if you want.
Well, just my only historical context is that it's no different to me than the support that America gave the UK in Second World War. Yeah. And we would never be critical of that.
Yeah. I would say, surely this is more of a European problem, and I don't doubt that. I don't deny that, and everybody should understand that. We Eastern Europeans have always said that. We also need help. I mean, like I said, our states got destroyed. Our nations, our identities got destroyed, and no one helped us. I said this on your last show. You might not remember. The U.S. has had an unbroken relationship with the Baltics for 100+ years now. And how could that be if we were occupied by the Soviet Union and part of the Soviet Union, not an independent country? How could that be that our flags are flying in Washington? It's because they never recognized the occupation of the Soviet Union, something that Russia, Moscow, has never admitted, that they occupied us. So there are times when the West needs to step in and help. I wish they helped more. My ancestors, I wish they had helped us more. They didn't. They chose to stop. Churchill actually had it's called Operation Unthinkable, by the way. It was to go in to Moscow after the Nazis were taken out. He had a plan. I'm not saying he should do it. I'm not saying whatever. I'm just saying it's interesting that he had planned that way. But look, they were tyrants. They knew that they were just horrible, awful tyrants. But we forget, life moves on. You need to trade. You need to start things up again. And we were, my relatives in Latvia, say the ones that grew up in the 50s and the 60s, this is something we should never want for our children. They were worse off than their parents, and this was all because we got swept under the rug of communist totalitarian Moscow. And that's just sad. You've seen those pictures. They've been going around Twitter, I'm sure. They're primarily Germans, but there's also conservative Americans during World War II say, let Hitler do what, let Germans make their own decisions. No war. Let's stay out. You've seen this. Mm-hmm. Do you think that was a good idea? Of
course not.
Yeah. So, but again, I do submit this. I don't know, like olive branch, whatever. I'm not telling Americans to come over and start nuclear war. Not at all. And by the way, no one is talking about attacking Moscow. Never have we ever said that. We know who our enemy is. We know that they haven't had a democratic leader ever in 1,000 years, except for maybe 9 years between 1991 and 2000 with drunken Boris Yeltsin, who was hilarious, but tragic at the same time. I know that. I know that this is a European problem. If the Texas libertarians want to get the U.S. out of NATO, go for it. I have no qualms with that idea at all. I'm not for, some, I don't know, woke liberal, I don't know, transgender NATO, like just taking over the world. I mean, it should be obvious this is not what we're talking about here. We're talking about base values, human rights, freedom.
One of the interesting points that came up, I think it came up on Joe Rogan's show, was a discussion about how it's this kind of whole. I think when he had Michael Malice on, they were discussing how it's flipped. That it was the neocons in Iraq, and now it's the Democrats who are get involved in a new forever war. And I think they missed an important distinction in that the war in Iraq was an attack.
Yeah.
It was wasn't a defensive move. This was an offensive move into two countries. Afghanistan, following 9/11, it's unsurprising that happened, but Iraq was an offensive, unnecessary move. The difference here is that Ukraine is a defensive support. It's a defense of a nation that's being attacked. And that's very much within the wheelhouse of how progressive thinks. If you read The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, he talks about the care-harm side. This is why progressives are for so much equality and fairness, because that's what they care about, is the care-harm. And so it's only natural that they want to defend a nation that's being attacked. So I think they missed it isn't, to me, as a flip. It is right within the wheelhouse of how these people think.
Yeah, and I would look at it a little bit from the side of Switzerland, who has always adhered more to the U.S. Constitution than the United States. I don't mean literally, I mean figuratively, that they were designed after the U.S. Constitution. Size does matter. There's a great book, I just mentioned it on Marty's show, and I always forget the name. It's Donald Livingston is the author, Rethinking the American Union or something like this. And of course, it's more about the real federalism and everything. And size matters. The disastrous capital idea of the Hunger Games can be such a thing when you have just the capital so far away from the people. Size does matter. If you measured the capital of the representatives in the United States, original colonies versus the representatives today, and try to standardize it, you could go either way. You'd either need thousands more representatives today, or if you looked at back then compared to the representatives now, like 5 states would have 0 representatives. You could go either way looking at that. So size matters. My point, again, following up on your point, is I think Switzerland is a very good model of not letting the extremes get out of control. And that's always the case. I mean, the middle ground, middle of the road, people that understand basic human rights and liberty and want that, they want that for their children. They're never going to want the one side or the other to get out of control. And Switzerland has always actually succeeded at that, always.
Do you know, I think Matthew would have an amazing conversation with.
Who's that?
Natalie Smolenski.
Yes.
Do you know Natalie?
I don't.
She's been on our show twice. She actually wrote an article rethinking the American
Dream, I think.
The American Dream or the American Republic. She's been on our show twice. She's utterly brilliant. Somehow I need to get you two together.
Yeah.
You might maybe here in 2024. I think she's going to be at the Miami conference. What was the rethinking the...
Rethinking the American Union,
Dream.
maybe? Sorry. What she... Yeah. The one I'm talking about was Donald Livingston.
Oh, no, was it the refounding of the American Republic?
I don't know. Let me check.
I think it was the refounding of the American Republic. Well, I'll find the article and I'll send it to you. I think you'll enjoy it.
Sure.
She recognizes kind of similar things, but she's utterly brilliant.
Yeah, I'd love to. I think...
Do you do this stuff on your podcast?
We've covered a lot of ground. Yeah, I do these dailies, which we wanted to talk about today, that I'm doing more on money. I do drop a lot of this in, as always, but I do think like the most interesting history is monetary history. It's like that's where everybody trends towards. That's like the decisions are made around that. And I think actually most historians don't even understand that. They don't. I wouldn't say the historians that I've quoted thus far, but a lot of people, they just are completely blind to the power that money has to either do good things or bad things. And I'll give you 2 examples. A little bit about the monetary history, right? So we had the most famous, hilarious scammer. He's a Scot. His name's John Law. Do you know who he is? Do you know this name? John Law.
Why do I know that?
He's very famous. He basically...
Maybe you told me about him before.
I might have. I can't remember. I've talked about him before. He's hilarious because he was a gambler. He was smart. He's from a family of goldsmiths and bankers. He's smart. But a gambler. He actually lost a duel over a woman in the UK, couldn't come back to the UK, bounced around Europe, eventually made his way to France, fell in love with a royal, eventually made friends with the regent at the time of Louis the, 14th, 15th, something like this. This was early 1700s.
Sounds like Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah. His story is amazing. I would recommend, what's his name? Bad on names this morning, from the Hoover Institution. He's also a Scot. He lives in the United States right now. I'll think of it at some point. Anyway, his story about John Law. But lots of people have written about him. He's famous. Basically, he became the first central banker of France, making friends with the regent for King Louis, who was like the regent of Orleans or something. And coincidentally, he also went to New Orleans. He had this Mississippi, you remember the Mississippi bubble, the Mississippi Company? It's basically a completely paper-based fiction, paper money. Which again, you want to see, paper money's not bad. We can talk about this history as well, but it's bad when it's at the control of the state. So he was just making friends in France. This guy must have been like Bill Clinton times a billion. He was so suave that like he could just, he made his way into the royal court of France and he became the first central banker. And so the rest of the bankers in France figured this out about him. They figured that he was a kind of a shyster. And he started a bunch of paper money schemes and everything, and backed by the state and everything. And so they said, let's try to collect on this guy. And the way that free banking works, if you extend your credit too much, all right, paper credit, bills of exchange, checks, all this stuff, banknotes. When this starts, this is the way banking works. This is a good topic. We'll get more into free banking as well. But when you start getting too much paper out into other banks, all right, historically, the way that the market works is other bankers see that paper and they know their reserves. They know like what a prudent level of lending is. And again, this is why fractional reserve isn't bad in the free market. So what is in the free market? What do free bankers do? They claim gold on that bank where they see all these checks and banknotes coming to their coffers. Like, I think they're just issuing way beyond their means. And so they go claim. There were 5 banks that tried to do this against John Law in France, early 1700s. The regent bailed him out. This is where he truly became like a central bank. In the middle of the day, the regent, so they thought that they would get him, and they did get him. But in the middle of the day, the regent sent like a boatload of gold to his bank. It was called Banque Générale, eventually like Banque Centrale or something. In the middle of the day, when everybody would see, sent a boatload of gold on crates into the bank to instill confidence. All right. Only in a state-like situation, a coercive government situation, would this work. Compare this now to Scotland, free banking situation.
Wait, why did they do that, first of all?
To stop the run, to instill confidence.
But in free banking, would they not want to let that fail?
Exactly. This was not free banking, so this
is
didn't
the
fail.
central state.
So the state, the regent, the guy that's actually like, watching over King Louis, one of the King Louis, he's like, all right, we'll stop this. We'll help you out. Because again, I don't know, he's like, Law was sleeping with his cousin or something. I don't know, some royal. He was such a suave guy. And so they bailed him out. Like in the middle of the day, a boatload of gold goes into his bank while all these other banks are trying to claim gold. And so they back off. And this is central banking. As opposed, this still exists to this day. Like SVB is the same story.
Yep.
But you contrast that story to free banking in Scotland, same time. A little bit later, I think it was like late 1700s, there was this bank. It was called the Ayr Bank, A-Y-R, Ayr. My Scottish friend tells me it's not Ayr. I sound like a wanker if I say Ayr. It's Ayr. Ayr Bank, they did the same thing. They failed spectacularly, and Scotland had no central bank. They were a free banking society. And Adam Smith wrote about this, said it was a very good thing for them. And so other banks in Ayrshire around this, they saw the notes come into their bank, and they're like, this doesn't make sense. They wouldn't claim their gold. The bank failed spectacularly. And at that time, there was no D&O, officers insurance. There was no limited liability. It bankrupted everybody in the bank. Sadly, but rightly so. And Scotland carried on. They had hundreds of years of free banking system. So that's how the bank should work. So I'm a big fan of this history, by the way.
Yeah. But
then the people that are like, say, oh, well, it doesn't work, or 100% reserve banking is better, whatever, which we can talk about. I fully admit that the free banks have failed. We, as I said at the beginning of the show, we now have a central bank in every country. So unfortunately, we can't, even if free banking could come back in one country and be great, there's always a risk that it could fail again. And we have more central banks controlling the money. This is why we need Bitcoin.
Right, okay.
But my view is a little bit different, I think, than most people in that, they just want the whole, everything to be on the blockchain, which, by the way, is what we didn't say during the scaling debate, shouldn't all be on the blockchain. But, all payments, everything should be on the blockchain. I don't care if it's on Lightning, banks, Fedimint. That's fiduciary media, by the way. And I'm getting a lot of topics.
Yeah, we have got a long notes here. Jesus. Okay, firstly, Danny, we need to read more.
Yeah.
We don't read enough books. Jesus Christ, you saved me. It's like I get to read 10 books in about an hour with you. Okay, you say we don't have free banking, but do we essentially have free banking with Bitcoin? Because when everyone's levered up with Bitcoin and there is a run, they fail, and there is no central bank that bails out any Bitcoin situation, whether it's BlockFi, FTX, Celsius, they've all failed.
I would say yes.
So we do have free banking in Bitcoin.
I would say yes for now.
For now.
And here's the interesting point. I have a different view as, say, like the Caitlin Long view of Custodia. I love Caitlin Long, by the way. She's been on my show. She's great. She should do it. Custodia, they're in this fight. For those that don't know, they're in this fight. They're trying, and she will pursue legal action. Like, they've been denied a master account. They've been denied a monopolistic privileged banking license, which is another problem, by the way. This goes back to the central banking and legal tender that I mentioned before. But nonetheless, we know that she's a good actor.
Sorry, what is a monopolistic?
If you have monopoly means one thing and one thing only. It does not mean a big company. Never did. In the days of Adam Smith, this is the real definition. A monopoly simply means a license from the state to operate. That's it. So John Law was protected with a license from the state to operate. The Air Bank was not. That's it. A monopoly. And all banks are monopolies. Now you need a banking charter. Of course, we have tons of regulations that are just disastrous for banking.
So we have two meanings for monopoly now. Because
this is a debate that the Austrians have been fighting for a long time. A good fight, right? Mises came up with this idea. He said there was never the idea of a natural monopoly, like some big company. Marx said this. He said that the fear was that there'd just be one company ruling the world like this. This is why communism, this is why we can't have the market, because there's going to be one company ruling the world. This was like one of his ideas. That's the Marxian idea of monopoly. That's never the case. It's never been the case. Even you can even see in the US, there's a great historian of this. His name's Thomas Di Lorenzo. I recommend people. He's an Austrian, like his writings, Thomas Di Lorenzo. You can look at like the legislation, the anti-monopolistic legislation against IBM. Then you move on to Microsoft. Then you move on to Google. Then you move on to Amazon. There's always one company that's going to fuck us, right? In the tech world, that's always the view. It's like that. But we see that it never happens. And for people that make the case, that's because we have antitrust legislation. No, that wasn't the case at all. You have to go back and look at the Rockefellers. I don't want to go to that story right now. But it's never the case that the government is actually saving you from monopoly, or that there's some big company that's going to just screw you and somehow be so good and provide such services that you need that then he's going to screw you later and like price gouge or something. Like that's the cartoon version.
Is it an excuse to tax them through some fine?
And what? Sorry.
So, for example, the antitrust legislation, which is antitrust prosecutions, are essentially prosecutions against monopolistic powers, which usually end up with these fines that are in billions. Yeah. I never know where that money goes. I assume it's a tax.
Yeah, and it doesn't. It's all. Yeah, this is the deep state that we don't like. All that stuff. It's just nonsense. But Thomas Di Lorenzo, I'm quoting him. He has this great story about the IBM. There was an IBM antitrust legislation. Of course, like IBM. We think of IBM now as being a problem. In the 80s, in the 70s, it was. They were like took over the mainframe to the biggest mainframe operators in the PC as well. They were a monopoly. There was like 10-year antitrust legislation being brought against them by someone. I don't know if it was the government or whatever, people, consumers, I don't know, class action, I don't know. But it was like 10 years of legislation. And then the judge died. And then the next judge just said, the hell with it. I can't review this. We're dropping the case. And they dropped the case. This is IBM, like famous IBM, like who would even care? Like you say it now, it's so laughable. They dropped the case. They didn't do anything. And is IBM going to kill us now with robots in 2023? No. I mean, again, we do have AI. That's a whole other topic. But you always see these boogeymen in the markets, and the government comes to save us, but it never does. this way. And by the way, I know people are going to try to say, oh, you're being paradoxical when you're talking about war and military. Not at all. This is a completely different thing. Let's not mix those things. We're talking about inside the country, a market, free market, property rights, all the rest. Let's not go too deep on this show with those debates. But yeah, when you're talking about freedom in the market, people competing freely, competitive companies, all the rest, the myth of the monopoly is huge. So that was a longer tangent on monopoly. I think we wanted to go on.
Good. But so we do essentially, I mean, I think we all agree that right now we kind of have free banking in Bitcoin because there's no bailout because you can't print the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So if you don't have it, I mean, and I just don't see a scenario, even if the government held a bunch of Bitcoin, it was going to fail, it would release their Bitcoin to save the banking sector. I think they would let things fail.
Yeah, which is interesting because they just sold a bunch.
Yes, they did.
Into the market. It's kind of weird that you would want to outlaw something and then sell it and then outlaw you after you sell it in. It's kind of weird.
They still hold some anyway.
Yeah.
Some of that's my Bitcoin, by the way. So
Famous
the
story,
idea,
I've heard it.
So the idea of the of 100%
full reserve banking.
Well, 108%, I think, is what Caitlin wants.
Yeah, we should revisit this.
Yeah, so the reason I want to revisit it and revisit the idea of fractional reserve banking, because a lot of Bitcoiners are against it. One of the things that I've had a slight concern with is the idea on a Bitcoinized world that we have a slowdown in credit. And would a slowdown in credit see a massive slowdown in the economy? People are unable to start business, unable to afford homes. Yeah, how much do we need credit, and how do we have the right constraints in credit?
Okay. My view on credit is it's generally fine in the free banking system. I don't try to be more aggressive than that towards free banking. So a lot of people like accuse me as well. It's like, oh, you're just blind to like the ways of the state. I don't think at all. And I think I've given examples of that. But so the thing about credit is you can't stop people at any given point from interacting. Like we could have one Bitcoin, all right, between the three of us. I have one Bitcoin, I give you a loan, you have the same Bitcoin, you give Danny a loan, and then we go around to Emma and somewhere else. And like, you know, we have now 4 or 5 loans with the same Bitcoin. It's totally possible to have credit in a 100% full reserve banking system because you can make loans even outside of the banks. And even the church said this, you know, it's like no matter what, you know, who were the biggest people that were against the charging of interest? It was the church. The caliphate never allowed it, Muslim world, ever for like 1,500 years. Although I think they have interest in their banking world now. They don't have a clear definition. If you have any Muslim scholars, be curious. I'd want to know what is the definition of usury in the Muslim world today. So they never allowed it.
Because you have Muslim-friendly mortgages. And I'm like, how have you done this?
I don't understand
it's still a loan.
I think that they have interest. They're just defining it very narrowly.
Yeah.
The church as well. This, in my view, is the bad nature of trying to over-control banking. The church did the same. The church didn't let go of allow interest until like 1600, and that was actually the Protestants were part of that, and the Anglican Church as well. I think one of the queens of England was the first one to actually say, okay, it's okay to charge interest. Still no usury, and they tried to let go, but in the normal course of business, you can do interest. But the church was always against the charging of interest. And by the way, it's not. I mentioned the Jews earlier in Poland had a great history of merchant banking in Europe and in Poland as well. They were invited in to Poland, Lithuania to help with banking because, you know, and we were like pagan people, weren't really doing much trade in banking earlier on. They were invited in to help, but it's not this is another thing, like it's not even stereotypical to say that Jews were involved in banking. Why were they? I just told you the church forbade interest and the Muslims, I mean, they were out anyway, I think, dealing with the Jews. They also forbade interest. The Jews were the people that thankfully innovated banking and helped the charging of interest in Europe. So it's totally another good thing. That's a little bit of a tangent. But anyway, back to Caitlin Long. I think we should talk about this point because this is an interesting one where this goes back to the idea of the narrow bank.
Yep.
This is, first of all, this argument has never been used against free bankers. Okay. A 100% fully reserved bank has never been illegal throughout history. Anybody could do it. And the most successful, I would argue, 100% gold, reserve bank, which is reserved in gold today, is gold money. Jim Turk, Peter Schiff is an investor in gold money. A lot of, there's Roy Seabag's a great luminary, I think, in the space. You're more than welcome to have a 100% gold reserved account in gold money. But what's the catch there? You got to pay. You got to pay. And a lot of people just don't want to pay, and that's okay. So then you argue that, oh, it's fraud. You know, people are lending out your money. You don't really know. That's actually never been the case in banking history. Never. Let me ask you this. Like 1500s banking, what do you think was more prevalent? Paper checks, paper banknotes, or coin? What was most prevalent as far as just transactions?
I would have thought coin.
Incorrect.
Okay.
Yep. It is checks, actually. The banknote itself didn't even develop till around the time of John Law, there, 1700s, 1800s. And mostly that was a monopolized instrument, wasn't much of a free market instrument. But the check was around for 1,000 years. So here's another thing that, just stop me, by the way, if I'm...
Keep going, man.
Okay. So, because this proves the point of... So the idea is that this is like the biggest myth of all time, is the allegory of the merchant banker trying to like pull the wool over the eyes of the, and I'm being facetious here, the middle-class peasant that somehow has a gold florin coin and he's really looking for a sacred vault to put his gold florin coin. You know what I mean? So it's like the bankers, they're the tricksters. They're the ones that are going to loan out the money and let you trade with the paper. All right. But that's a problem because there's so many dumb plebs, middle class peasants that have like apparently one gold coin or a couple gold coins and really need a vault. They really need a bank vault. You can maybe get a bit where I'm going there. First of all, that's an allegory that just never happened in banking history. Never. It's never been proven. Also, there's never been a gold exit scam of gold merchant banking where like the gold is in the vault, people are trading the paper, all of a sudden the gold's gone or someone ran away with it. Now, I'm sure you can find in banking history and like Medici's, like some Medici banker ran away with a couple sacks of gold in the middle of the night, never returned to Italy. I'm sure.
You can find it in crypto.
Yeah, that's it. You can find it in crypto. So there's absolutely bad actors, 100%.
But it's a lot easier to run off with
easier to run off.
Yeah, with a seed phrase than it is to run off with a boatload of gold.
Yeah. So George Selgin's written a lot about this. He has a paper. It's called Those Dishonest Goldsmiths. Great paper. I would absolutely recommend it. He tackles this full on. But how do we know that this is a total myth and an allegory, never happened in reality? First, paper wasn't invented. This always starts in Renaissance Italy, by the way. This is the story. It's Renaissance Italy. Some dishonest goldsmiths are taking your gold, disingenuously lending it out, right? And then you're just trading the paper and that's it. And like, again, you got to ask yourself, who is the one for, okay, so let's start prima facie. The Czechs started 500 years before that. It started in Iraq, actually. It was called the sock. The sock. I'm not a chess buff, but it's an Arabic word. In chess, it's a Persian word. I think it's shachmat. It's the same type of word, interestingly. I know Persian and Arabic are a little bit different, but the Czechs started in Iraq. It's called the sock. That was around 1,000 years ago. And the Chinese started, not maybe a check, something called the Bill of Exchange. It's basically a check between cities. We don't have to go too detailed on that, but it's basically a merchant paper system. They started that almost 1,500 years ago, like 600, 700 AD. The Chinese did that. Marco Polo brought that to Europe. So prima facie, this idea never happened. It wasn't that just like everybody needed a Scrooge McDuck gold vault to take their 1 ounce of gold coin and put it there because they were so... First of all, you got to ask, okay, so this is the next question, just to debunk this. Who would need those types of services? Because it is true, transporting gold is difficult, transporting gold is dangerous. So who would need these types of fiduciary media services where you're going to start changing checks, bills of exchange, and eventually banknotes?
Well, the banks themselves.
The banks themselves, the merchants themselves. It's in the name, merchant banking. It's the merchants themselves. In China, the coins were actually... They had a hole in the middle, and the coins, like the merchants would run around with the coins like on a string, and it became cumbersome. And these weren't even like gold coins, but like copper coins. So they started that, the first thing. Genghis Khan's like grandson actually first monopolized that, like 500 years later. But it started in the market. important to note. These were merchants in China, merchants in Iraq, and in the Muslim world, and also the Medicis, the Lombards. They kind of brought it up in Europe, as well as the Jews. And it's not a crime. It's not a problem. Nobody's trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. They are precisely the people that are supposedly ripping other people off that need it. They need to go, okay, hey, I got to make a payment to my relative or to my coworker or my supplier in Genoa. I'm in Florence. I don't want to send the gold. Let's start sending a check, or what's called a bill of exchange. It's kind of like a check that doesn't need a bank. It's not worth going into now, but they would send the paper back and forth. And so that's how you clear. That's the beauty of banking, I think. It's interesting. And so this whole idea, which is unfortunately popularized by Murray Rothbard, is that it's fraudulent and it causes the business cycle. Nowadays, no Austrian worth their salt will even admit that it's fraudulent. They know that it's not fraudulent. Like we all sign, it's like an iTunes agreement, right? Like you don't read it, you click, okay. It's the same with your bank agreement. This stuff has been legislated on for hundreds of years. It's very clear in your bank agreement. You are a creditor to the bank. They are a debtor to you. All right. There's no promise of a full reserve. It's nothing. So this goes back to the gold money thing. It goes back to Caitlin Long as well. If you want a full reserve, Bitcoin or gold or whatever, do it. I say do it. The deeper question, which I always point out to people, is like, what is fully reserved Bitcoin? It's Bitcoin that you hold yourself. You validate on your node, you hold the keys, all the rest. That's fully reserved Bitcoin. So that's base money. That's why it's most analogous to like the core of the system. If you want to start lending it out, if you want some yield, if you want staking, as they call it now, or just interest, that's what people have preferred over the years. And you see it in monopolized systems, but you even see it more in free banking systems. This is one of the things George talks about. So like in the Scottish system, there was like 1% gold in the vault to the checks, the claims, the bankers' deposits outstanding. 1%. People preferred, for all the reasons we know today. Like even today, no one wants coins in their pocket, but even bills, right? I mean, it's already taken over electronically, but even back then, it was the same reasons. Risky to transport, difficult to hold. I'd rather prefer bills in my pocket than some clunky coins that are also at risk of being lost or theft. So anyway, that was a huge tangent, longer than I planned, on free banking. I really want to get back to Caitlin Long. This is an interesting thing now that never would have occurred before. It started with this idea, this narrow bank. But I actually don't know who was behind that. It was a couple of years ago. It came out before Caitlin Long. It was called the narrow bank.
Yeah, Lynn wrote about it recently.
Yeah. So they haven't been able to get a Fed account either, a master account either, basically. I think they might even have a banking charter. They got the monopoly, but they can't get the account. They wanted to do basically just keep their customers' deposits on account with the Fed, not lend them out, and just take the Fed interest, which they've started to pay since 2008, very important point, and pay to depositors. So first point, as I hopefully just described in a longer tangent than I planned, 100% reserve banks have never been illegal before then. And you can imagine if someone is like going through a bank run, these famous bank runs in the 1800s or something, what did they do immediately after they took their money out? They went to another bank. So it's not like, it was always open for entrepreneurship. It's never been illegal. It is true though, and this is where I give a point to the full reservists. They're making this point, but it's a little bit nuanced. In the last 15 years, when the Fed allowed interest to be charged on reserves, before it was like, all right, you'll have your reserve, you settle. It's the same thing with checks, by the way. You settle with neighboring banks all the time, like every day, checks, whatever, you settle at the reserve account with the Fed. That's not a problem, right? But we're not going to give you interest.
Hold on. Do you want to bring him into the kitchen? You can come in, Obi.
Hey, how's it going?
Is this ready, Obi?
Yeah.
Obi, grab a seat, man. It's fine. Do you know Matthew? Matthew Mezinskis.
Hey.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Obi's Fedimint.
Fedimint. I just mentioned Fedimint.
Yeah, you just brought up Fedimint.
Yeah, I brought up Fedimint. So it's good fiduciary media.
And by the way, if you want a cup of tea, my dad makes we'll have a little break.
How you doing?
It's my father.
Nice to meet you.
He makes an excellent cup of tea if you want one.
All right, I would love one.
Can we have
I told my wife we're definitely doing English tea at some point.
Coffee.
Thank you.
Coffee. Milk, sugar? No milk. No sugar.
Milk is good.
Just milk?
Milk.
So you're a tea, 2 coffee. And Jerry.
Are we going to leave this bit in?
I think we should leave this bit.
Yeah, we should leave it. That's great.
Okay.
Fediment is great fiduciary media, by the way. But so the point is, getting long-winded here. We haven't even looked at any charts.
I know. We've done an hour and 10 minutes lead up.
Okay.
Normally they're 5 minutes.
So the narrow bank, that idea, they're not allowing it, obviously, because it is too safe for them right now. But they never had the chart, like they never would give banks this interest on reserves. That actually, when they did the bailout in 2008, which I can show you. Actually, I'll show you right now with a picture. So this is a chart. I have my picture typically down here below, not so much white space, but you can see obviously two different monetary epochs. This is the total money supply of the United States, only the United States. I do base money across 50 currencies, but this is only the United States over the last like 60 years. You can see this is one monetary epoch here. I'll take away this and this. It's just money supply, okay? And then you see here 2008. But what's the big thing that happened in 2008? Well, the money supply started to explode. It was the explosion of bank reserves to basically bail out the banking system. So if I take away everything else and I just show you bank reserves, which is high-powered money, which is why I have this whale here. It used to...
Holy shit.
This influences interest rates the most.
I think you should probably explain exactly
for
what
people
bank
listening.
reserves are.
Yeah. So bank reserves are basically basic money along with cash. Okay, unfortunately monopolized by the central bank. As I said, it's not good that the state monopolizes this stuff, but the bank reserve and fiat cash, the things that you actually think of, the notes and the coins, although the Federal Reserve only controls notes. Other central banks do notes and coins. They make up the monetary base. Okay, so I can look at it from the other side here where I have vault cash. It's basically nothing. The physical cash banks hold in a vault. You barely see the line change. It's light blue there. It's a little bit. You can barely see it. And then what's called M0, or this is the rest of the physical cash that's in society. So this is the entire monetary base. It's basically the Fed's balance sheet. So you see that this exploded here, primarily the bank reserve portion in 2008. What was it? It was just a bailout. Never good. This is the regent in France bailing out his buddies. It's not the air bank freely letting a bank fail, and succeed or fail on their own bottom.
And so it ran up when 2008 to about 2014?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's another thing too, is even though this is like digital money, ledger money, when it falls, this is not money being printed. Bitcoiners would always say the Federal Reserve just prints. It's actually not true. I'm not defending the Fed, but you do have to be a little bit more nuanced.
So what is happening?
Well, right now, they're trying to control this COVID stimulus.
When it's being reduced.
They're selling securities, typically bonds, into the market. And then so the banks get the bonds back.
Okay.
And then they get the bank reserves from the bank and they destroy them.
Okay.
That's how it gets out of the money supply. But again, you didn't need a central bank for this. Like the banks in Scotland cleared with themselves. It was kind of a small country, so it was easy. Same with Sweden and Canada also. It's actually a small country. It was the same. But even in the United States, in the 1800s, we had a bank. It was called the Suffolk Bank. It acted like a central bank. So what is it? It's how you clear at the end of the day. And I think maybe an example will help. I don't know how much longer we have, though. So
as long as you want.
As long as you want. OB's about 2 hours early.
All right. All right. So clearing. This is actually relates to Fed Now, by the way. A lot of people call Fed Now a CBDC. It's not. It's just clearing of bank reserves, or it's not bank reserves of bank reserves faster. It's not a CBDC. But so let's imagine a check, good old fiduciary media, good old paper money. Okay. Let's say I send you a check, whatever. Give me two banks in England.
Lloyd's and NatWest.
Royal Bank of Scotland.
Lloyd's and Royal Bank. Okay. What did you say?
I said NatWest. I mean, that's a Scottish bank.
All right, so let's stick
probably
with
based in the UK.
Yeah, let's stick with NatWest actually. So Lloyd's and NatWest. All right. I'm Lloyd's. You're NatWest. I give you a check. It could take some days to clear. It used to take much longer. Now it usually they can get it done in days. The clerks. I mean, you could do it on your phone and whatever. It's even faster, but. At least in the US, I'm not sure if you can do it on your phone.
Everything's super quick now.
Yeah, but you still have checks in the UK, right? Actual paper checks.
I mean, they exist.
Yeah.
I haven't written one myself in years, and actually, interestingly, I bank with Revolut, which is a branchless bank, and I own shares in a company, and I received my dividend as a check, And I can't cash that check. I can't put it into the bank because Revolut don't have branches. They don't accept checks. You can't mail them to them. So they have no check. They have no check service.
Yeah. And it's probably better for them to keep that cost down.
Yeah. So I had to actually then go back to the company and they had to put it through as a direct debit.
Yeah. It's the same in Eastern Europe.
I'm 31 and I've never written a check.
What?
Yeah.
You've never written a check?
Never had to write a check.
It's pretty wild because I'm 9 years older than you. And when I was in school in the US, that was like a daily thing. I'd take my check, wait in line at the bank, deposit my check. All right, 20 years ago. It's an unbelievable thing to think about. But the US is still tied to checks. Like the Treasury, they send out their stimulus checks in check form. They're way tied to checks.
So they were a physical check?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you used to use it a lot for work, for business. So if you get an invoice in, you'd usually, before you had online banking, it was my first business. Well, I mean, there was online banking, but most of the time you'd be paying checks.
Huh. Yeah. So it's totally antiquated. Obviously, the digital world, we don't need it. And with Bitcoin, we don't need it even more. But it's a good example to help you show how bank reserves work. So Lloyd's, NatWest, check, takes a couple days. Now let's multiply this by 1 billion payments or whatever, or how much it goes. And also, let's say I'm Lloyd's, right? Lloyd's has a lot of checks that are making their way into NatWest's coffers, into their tellers. Not in the UK. Let's just imagine this is the US, whatever. Should we use the US bank? Wells Fargo and Bank of America. Let's keep with the NatWest. NatWest has a lot of checks going back into Lloyd's coffers, all right? Where do they clear those? They clear them at the central bank. But does the central bank care about, like, let's say it's £1 billion, whatever. And let's say it's £1 billion coming to you and £1 billion and £1 coming to me. Does the central bank care about those 2 billion in total pounds? No, they'll care about the £1 difference.
Yeah.
And the £1 difference is this.
Okay.
That's how they sort it. That's banking. That's clearing at the bank. They don't care about it. It clears on net. This is why banking exists in total. This is why the merchant bankers are doing it as well. They don't care about gross payments.
Oh, hold on. So if there's 50 banks, they've all got money going between themselves. At the end, when the clearing is the balance held at the central bank.
Yes.
I've always wondered how that happened. I always wondered what physically happened at the end of the week. NatWest owed Lloyd's $1 billion, whatever. I wondered, how did that billion get to them? Because if no physical cash is, it's not like they're coming up with a truck and saying, "Here's your billion." Yeah. How's that actually settling? Where is that number? And it's really because the central bank controls the issuance of money, therefore controls the total amount of money. Yeah. Therefore, they're really just adjusting between them. That's something I've never understood.
There you go. And it's a net thing.
Did you know that, by the way?
Yes, I did.
He always says that. He always says that.
But it's a net. This is important. This is why FedNow people don't understand. It's not a CBDC. Again, I want to reiterate, not defending the central bank. Scotland did this. Canada did this freely.
Thanks, Dad.
You don't. It's just, this was, again, their impetus. They try to say, oh, we need to have less discounts. That's another thing we didn't talk about, by the way. The discount rate. You know the etymology of this, the discount rate?
Nope, tell me.
All right. So this is like the base rate of the system. This is when the Federal Reserve, they have the discount rate. In the UK, they have it's called bank rate. I believe it's the same analogous thing. It's the base policy rate. It's what the bank will lend as a lender of last resort. It's a lender of last resort rate to the banking system. So if you need it. Typically, I don't want them to need it. During the Great Depression, actually, I'll pull up. I got a picture of it. It's better. The Federal Reserve lent freely at the discount rate, which they probably shouldn't have done. And they never admitted, of course. So let's zoom in here. This is the Great Depression. This is 100 years of Fed history here. Okay, this is the reserves. In dark green, in light green, we have the total Fed balance sheet. Okay, so think of the reserves. Again, I don't have a whale here as the icon. I have a bank picture, but this moves interest rates more than anything in the system. It's the reserves. It's the core, because the cash is not there. It's like in people's wallets, under a mattress. It's in grocery store tills. Cash doesn't do anything as far as leveraging the system. So anyway, look at this. This is the Great Depression of 1920-21 happened here when they conveniently raised interest rates. Then they dropped them very, very low here, 3%. Then they raised them because inflation was running hot. The skyscraper index, Mark Thornton from the Mises Institute has this. It's a great thing. Obviously, the skyscraper index, like whenever there's a lot of skyscrapers being built in like record numbers, which was happening in Manhattan at the time, it's probably a problem. It was happening here, the stock market, everything. Irving Fisher, yeah.
Can you explain the difference between the discount rate and the Fed's fund rate?
Yes, I can. So Irving Fisher, he said right here, 9 days before the Great Depression, stocks have reached a permanently high plateau. You know how it typically goes in this story. And look at what the discount rate is. It's peaking again. And then they have to, I know I'm cognizant now we have listeners as well, but the discount rate is not at an all-time high. Again, the Fed is only around for 20 years here. It was an all-time high during the Great Depression, or the Depression of 1920 to 21, it's called. Tom Woods actually made that famous. I don't think they even had a Wikipedia article before Tom Woods started talking about it. It was at 7%, caused it. And then the Great Depression, they went up to 6%, caused it, and then fell. They'll never admit this. Although Ben Bernanke did say at Milton Friedman's 90th birthday, we did exacerbate the Great Depression. We'll never do it again. And he's true to his word, by the way, because it's the same idea here. Bank reserves again exploding. It's the same picture. It's a Fed balance sheet. It's just on a weekly basis, a little bit different. But anyway, Danny, your question, the discount rate. So precisely in this time, in the teens and the 20s, when the Federal Reserve, George Selgin always jokes, it's like, oh, it's practice. Like they never take responsibility for the Great Depression, even though Ben Bernanke almost admitted as much to Milton Friedman, but they never officially take responsibility. They say this is like practice period. You know, they were just kind of figuring it out. You can see how small it is here, and it explodes during World War II. It's like a couple $100 million, explodes to over $1 billion, $6-7 billion after. Sorry, did I say World War II? World War I. The U.S. entered World War I. Anyway, they were another bank. They were another bank that would clear. They would discount. Not discount. They would actually clear checks, banknotes, everything at par. I'll get into the deeper level of discount rate in a second. But what the discount rate means right here is this is just the rate that they would lend to other banks. And it should be the lender of last resort rate. This is what Walter Bagehot, English editor of The Economist in the 1700s said, I think, late 1700s. Maybe 1800s now. I think 1700s. Or was it 1800s? Maybe you check it. Walter Bagehot. When was he alive? Anyway.
Do you want to know something really interesting?
Yeah.
Danny's got a new fact-checking tool for live fact-checking.
ChatGPT?
Yeah.
How does it work?
Well, so previously you'd go to Google and you would search for that. Like the other day, I'll give you an example.
Does it work well?
Brilliantly, apparently. Yeah. So the other day, somebody referenced a chapter in a book. And so normally you go to Google and then you would hope it would find the book maybe, and then you can access it. This time you just asked ChatGPT and they said, yeah, this is the chapter, this is what it contained.
I just said summarize chapter 27 in this book and it gave me a summary, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But it's like when it's finding a person a date, it's just as easy to Google it. But sometimes when it's a more like obscure reference, I'll type in the reference and ask for a source and then just go to it that way. And it's quicker than going through Google.
That's awesome. I should probably experiment with it.
You got to experiment because, I mean, firstly, I just thought it's the latest thing. Yeah. You know, it's the guy who was a blockchain expert, now an AI expert, and it's actually super fucking useful. There's all the fun shit you can do, and then there's all the useful stuff. My brother's using it on the show all the time. He gets AI to do the translations, does all different kinds of stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
We keep debating who's going to lose their job first.
That's what everybody's saying, right?
All of us all at once.
I think Danny survives longer than me.
It'd have been 1800s, I think. He died in 1877.
Have you seen Will Smith eating spaghetti?
No.
Oh my God.
You got to get it up.
You got to do, sorry, this is a bit of a tangent. Search for AI Will Smith eating spaghetti.
Oh, then you got to watch this other thing. I'm going to send you a link.
This entire thing was generated by AI. That second one down. Watch this video. All right, it's not great, but this is entirely AI generated.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait, but I've just sent you a link on Telegram, Matthew. Pull this up.
Oh, are you doing the rapper guy?
Yeah, I've DM'd you on Twitter instead.
Popular song. Here's an example of him singing Day and Night. I toss a turn, I keep stressing my mind.
So this is a Kanye AI voice.
I started thinking, what are the implications of this for the music industry? Now all you have to do is record reference vocals and replace it with a trained model of any musician you like, which is exactly what I did. I found this Kanye style beat on YouTube. I wrote 8 bars and I'm going to record them now, and then I'm going to have AI Kanye replace me. I got a fantasy that's beautiful, that's dark and twisted, but I attacked the whole religion all because of my ignorance. What was I thinking? That was some bitch shit. I lost Adidas, but I'm still Yeezy. Back in the kitchen, man, I'm a genius. Boys in the hood, just like I'm easy. Kanye, Weezy, Southside of Chicago, life ain't easy. All praise be to Lord Jesus, Donda, please rest easy. All right, let me cut it there. So let's hear those vocals I just recorded now with Kanye over there. Yeah. I got a fantasy that's beautiful, that's dark and twisted, but I attacked the whole religion all because of my ignorance. What was I thinking? That was some bitch shit. I lost Adidas, but I'm still Yeezy. Back in the kitchen, man, I'm a genius. Boys in the hood, just like I'm easy. Kanye, Weezy, Southside of Chicago, life ain't easy. All praise be to Lord.
So this is why I'm not on Twitter as much as you. I just waste too much time.
Yo, that new Yeezy track goes hard.
No, but obviously I know it's not a waste of time for you.
Yeah, but
doing good work here, but that's crazy.
Do
you want to pause it?
Yeah.
So
I forgot I'm
it's a bit
driving.
of a tangent. Firstly, we're fucked. We're so absolutely fucked. But secondly, I just think we're not even in the first innings yet with this AI stuff.
Yeah.
You know, they're still in the dressing room just getting ready, big in the team. And the stuff and the speed at which people are figuring stuff out now, I think is crazy.
Yeah.
And so everything's replaceable. I can see a path where if there's 8 people who work on this podcast, where everyone's replaceable. But I think it's your last because you need a coordinator. I go first. I'm one of the first that goes. Or editing goes sales.
Also, think how much we have of your voice to model it off.
Yeah,
we've got 640 episodes.
I've seen
You've
those
said
with Joe
every word
Rogan.
in the world.
They're very convincing with Joe Rogan.
Have you seen-
And those were even like early AI models too. They're doing better now. But
Yeah, there's one where he interviews the old Apple CEO.
Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, I've not seen that.
Yeah, it's wild. So they've literally just created a whole interview between the two of them. So I'm replaceable.
that's nuts.
I think it's you and Austin, the partnerships guy, because he's got to get out there and sell the partnerships, and you as a coordinator.
All right, Austin, let's talk.
I could retire then.
True.
It's mad. It's mad.
Yeah.
Well, fucked. So, what was that interview you watched? We're all dead in 3 years.
Oh, yeah, on Bankless.
Yeah. This AI guy, proper expert.
Yeah.
We're all dead.
But they say that it goes back a little bit to the monopolistic discussion, right? Like it's whether it's one company or one tech taking over. It doesn't seem to happen, but yeah, like I said, you never know. You never know.
Well, the argument now is, does this make us more productive as a society, or does the productivity not lead to so put it a different way. So we can eliminate jobs because we have AI able to do those things. Does that lead other people to go and be more productive so we have a higher GDP?
Yeah.
Or do we have a lot of wasted resource and then a lower GDP?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's good questions.
Anyway, nice tangent. Sorry.
Good questions. Very nice tangent. It's good to have this
Totally
Back to the
throwing it
discount
out.
window
rate.
up. No, yeah. So the discount rate is basically the lender of last resort rate. That's what the Federal Reserve should have, at least according to Bagehot's theory, Walter Bagehot from the 1800s, economist, late 1800s now, I'm sure of it. The Economist, chief editor for like 20 years, he's not a fan of central banks either. And again, I'm not defending central banks, but he said you should at least, you're supposed to lend for, it's a famous thing that he says, lend freely as a lender of last resort on good collateral at penalty interest. That's what he says. This was not what they were doing here. I know I'm not showing you any other market rates. I've done a daily on this. I'll get you some commercial paper in the future. I'll put it on a show. They were just lending like a normal bank. Many banks were just going to them like a normal bank, and the Fed knew it was a problem. And by the way, the Great Depression happened during this period, so they never really admitted it. That's you can see it's this. It's people know this pattern, right? Interest rates rise because inflation's running hot. The market collapses. They drop interest rates. Look at that. It was 7% discount. They dropped it to 3% in the roaring 20s. All right, skyscraper index exploding, stock market exploding. Irving Fisher, 9 days before this happened, said stocks have reached a permanently high plateau. This is one of the founding economic wonks of like, we can control money supply and prices and all this stuff. And then you see what happens. So famous last words.
So the interest rate the Fed pays,
Yes.
is that based on the income they make by lending out to other banks? It's like if they're paying an interest rate.
No, the the payment rate, which you might have heard, I think Lynn Alden's pointed this out as well, which is good. Like they've Ben Bernanke used to say they never lost a cent on their open market operations. They are losing money now, like in a big way.
Yeah.
Because the interest rate that they're earning on their securities, right? Because they have assets, liabilities. This is the total assets are in green. I'm not breaking it up, but just think bonds. Here it was more banks. They actually had bank loans that they were getting back in interest. But that's way different. The teens and 20s are way different than today. Here, it's government securities. They're getting lower interest rate. Now it's higher as it's been rising, but it has been so low, they've been getting low. And plus they're charging, they're paying interest on reserves, which I mentioned before. They've only started doing that since the Great Depression, the GFC, the global financial crisis, the global financial crisis. They've only been doing that in the last 15 years. So they have interest coming in from their assets. Mm-hmm. They have interest going out that they pay banks, which they never did before. But now they're negative on that.
Why did they not do it before, and why did they do it now?
Because that's never would have been the way that banking would have worked. I mean, banks don't centralize and just keep things at the bank. The reason they did it, the reason that this exploded here, this reserve, let's just take off the balance sheet. This is the key. This reserve, this reason this thing exploded, where banks go from literally having 20 billion. You can see that number in the tooltip, 20, 30 billion. We don't even have to zoom in and see the tooltip. That's so small. And then just exploded to trillions, going to 2.5, 3 trillion. The reason that they did that was to bail out the bank's bad bets. But they knew that typically in banking, as it's always worked for the past prior years and all the time, again, free banks or unfree banks, it always works this way. You make money by going short your depositors and going long loans. So you get money in from your depositors, all right? And you go long on loans. You lend depositors money out. That's just how it works. You'll make the spread. As that golf saying, it's like lend it, I don't even remember now. It's like borrow at 1, lend at 2 on the course by 3 or something. But it's higher than that typically. Typically it's 4 and 5%, which you would even have to borrow at. And then you lend at a little bit higher, something like that. You make a spread. I'm just throwing out numbers right there. It is true that there's another point. The history of interest rates, Sidney Homer, it's a tome. He's studied interest rates for 4,000 years. Never have interest rates been as low as they were here in World War II. They're at a 0.5% discount rate, I'm showing. Now the Fed funds, I'm going to answer your question eventually. The Fed funds gets up to over 20%. The discount rate gets to 14%. Never, you'd have to go back to ancient Greece to find that, even farther, like ancient Sumer, never been that high. And then now we know where they've been, and we know the problem. So 0%. They've gone in the last 100 years, the central bank, the premier banking institution in the United States has gone to 3 extremes. Never, ever has happened in recorded history, except like 20% in ancient Greece.
And they increased their balance sheet too. They increased their reserves to bail out the banks. But what is the makeup of that?
Yeah, so that's literally cash. Like they're taking the bad securities. They bought these mortgage-backed securities, also treasuries. So the banks have treasuries always. They bank, but the treasury always issues bonds in the open market. The banks buy that stuff for like pension funds, hedge funds. That's just how banking works, right? It's always this leveraging up on credit. Like someone issues, like the treasury, banks buy it. They will take the interest from the treasury, pay a little bit less to their depositors. That's just how banking works. That's capital markets. And then it's not a crime. It's not a problem.
And from 2014, they were paying it off. They were clearing it.
They were tightening.
Tightening. Yes.
So they're tightening, but which essentially...
This is that QT, which is a bullshit term that they come up with. The same with QE, it was a bullshit term. Like this is QE1. You can see right here very clearly. Dear listener, it was like 10 billion bank reserves. Then it goes up to $1 trillion 2 years after the GFC. Then it goes up to $1.6 trillion. This is QE2. Then it goes up to 2.7. But that's QE3.
Their bank reserves are essentially debt.
It's a liability. It's a liability for the Fed. It's an asset for the banks.
Yeah,
that's how it works.
But for the Fed, it's kind of a debt.
Do this. It is exactly a debt. It's a liability.
So you call it a Federal Reserve, but it's a federal debt.
Yeah.
Okay.
They held no gold. So by the way, let's put the balance sheet back on. Reserves on the liability side. So I'm taking that off because it's kind of confusing. I could make these charts where they have liabilities on the bottom and assets on the top, but I'll get there eventually. This is the total balance sheet, total assets. There's securities on the asset side. There's the money on the liability side. That's how it always works, by the way, in banking. So remember what I said before. Debtor, you're a depositor in the bank. The bank is a debtor to you, you are a creditor of the bank. So you count up the liability. That means the bank has a liability to you. Your deposit represents a bank liability. So the way you want to calculate money, fiduciary media in the economy, is always counting up the liability side, interestingly. So this is what people say, like it's debt-based banking or whatever. Like this, it is. Money is always comes on the liability side first. Again, not a problem in the free market. If you fail on your own bottom. But this has been centralized for the last 100 years. Anyway, there was another question, even besides Danny's, that you had, and I'm not sure I answered.
So why does the Fed need to clear its reserves? Why did they do QT?
You mean to decrease it?
Yeah. Can't they just
Well,
have
they
those
say,
reserves
they
forever?
could. They could, and they certainly are. I mean, look in the last, I think actually they just posted as of this morning, it's still down a little bit more, but you can't actually see it when I'm zoomed in.
But is it because the banks themselves need to clear their debt with the Fed? So there is that natural process.
No, that has nothing to do with it.
No.
It's up to their discretion. So this is
why
base
do
money, by the
QT?
way. This is the whether we say balance sheet or the reserves. I'm not showing the notes. The notes make up the vast majority of the difference here. There's some other things too. They have this reverse repo facility now, which is kind of for non-banks.
I've got another question on that as well coming up.
Sure.
But why do QT? I get QE to stimulate the economy, but why do QT if it risks?
They say they want to normalize the economy. They know it's not good and everything. The reason in any other system, you see how low this is. Look, they're not even at $1 trillion by the GFC. Not even $1 trillion, $900 billion balance sheet. Now we're at trillions. They never got to 9. That must have been a voodoo number. So last year, they never got to 9. It was like 890, 892, 891. They never got to 9 trillion. Must have been a voodoo number. Then the Powell tried to cut it down. And by the way, he reversed 50% of that in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah.
So it's back to money printing. But anyway, the reason why we never had hyperinflation here is not a interest rate I'm showing on this chart. Unfortunately, I'll do a daily on this soon. It's this interest on reserve. So what effectively that did is Uncle Ben, Helicopter Ben, said, okay, we know that you made bad bets. All right, this is a problem. We're going to bail you out. We're going to credit your account with reserves. We're going to give you all the reserves you need to make your books better. This is these trillions of dollars. But we don't want you to lend that out. Because in normal banking, look how small the reserves are here. You see how small these reserves are as a portion of the balance sheet of the Fed. Remember, the rest is paper notes, most of it during this time, most of it. So we don't want you to lend that out because we know it's going to be massively hyperinflationary. So I'm going to pay you. This is that expense that Lynn's talking about. I'm going to start to pay you more than the market, so you don't actually, you just keep those reserves. So effectively, it's just a bailout. It's kicking the can down the road, but they know, I mean, it's been talked about for years. It's been 15 years now that this has been going on. They know that this is not going to be an easy unwinding of this problem. And so this is what they're doing.
All right. So, and I know I'm not the only one who thinks this because I've asked it a few times and people have commented back. But
did I answer your question?
No, you did. You did.
Okay.
Today,
keep asking.
Today has given me the clearest picture of the relationship between banks and central banks to a point I never fully understood before. A few things have been sliding into place. I was like, okay, and Lynn Alden's brilliant, but sometimes having the chart has explained it to me.
That's great to hear.
So I mean, it's been a
seeing it on pictures is much easier.
Now I get those relationships. Reverse repo.
Okay.
Do you know? I'm going to ask you.
Reverse repo always confused.
Let me answer Danny's question first because we're still on. So this is good. I'm glad we're jiving here with this. So discount rate. You see the discount rate? So here, this is really interesting. I just did a video on this, so it's top of mind. The discount rate is in black. You see it?
Yeah.
And the Fed funds now, they started to publish it. It's a weighted average rate in the 50s. You see it's in the orange. You see that's below the discount rate. This is actually perfect Walter Badgett theory of banking. Again, Walter Badgett's not a fan of central bank. I'm not either. But he said, if you're going to have a central bank, lend at penalty interest to good collateral, to good banks, and lend freely if there's a crisis. That's the idea. Of course, the Federal Reserve doesn't know the interest rate, but this is this is what he says. They actually adhered to this. And I wouldn't necessarily call this a penalty, but you can see it's the high end. Okay, like if you're listening to this, you see a black line that's above and just little spikes down of the Fed funds. And so now what is the Fed funds? This is the rate that banks lend their reserves, the dark green shaded area, to each other. And why would they do that? Well, remember I told you the example of £1 billion in checks going to you, whatever that bank, NatWest, $1 billion and one coming to me. at Lloyd's, there's a £1 difference. It's not a good example because you don't need to borrow money for one.
Yeah, but
sometimes you need to borrow money to cover that because you have reserve ratios, you have all these collateral ratios, all these other things. So at day end, if one bank is short on reserves, they will borrow them.
And do they do that from the repo market?
Yes and no. Yes and no. The Federal Reserve is now more involved in the repo market than it ever has, and I'll show you that. I got to go to the other chart. So let's not confuse it though, because they've never traditionally been involved in the repo market like that. The repo market, all it means basically is when you're going to have treasury securities trade like cash. That's what you need to think of the repo market. Okay, so the treasury, again, let's take the reserves out. Now I'm talking about the asset side of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet when they buy assets. All this light green stuff, all right, you see it. You see it on the screen, dear listeners. There's just a chart going from the lower left way to the upper right after the GFC. All of on the asset side is mostly securities. If banks hold those securities, now we're not talking about the Fed, but the other banks, they do the same thing. Okay, they have securities as well that they buy. Sometimes they sell them to the Federal Reserve for reserves. Sometimes they buy them from the Federal Reserve, and then they give the Federal Reserve reserves, and that destroys money. That's what's happening in the last couple of years before COVID and in the last year. Anyway, I know it's hard to conceptualize all this stuff, but this is how the fiduciary system works. This is how banking works. And if a bank outside of the context of the Federal Reserve wanted to have more liquidity, they could, and particularly non-banks even, and this is actually another point I wanted to bring up, is particularly money market funds. Okay, and money market funds, what is that? That's just a stable coin. You got to think of a stable coin. Mm-hmm. Stable coin is actually more like a euro dollar because it's a money market fund, but it's outside of the control of the central bank. So that's what a euro dollar means. It's a dollar-based account in France or the UK or whatever. There's euro sterling. There's euros, but they don't call it that because it'd be stupid. It has nothing to do with Europe, by the way. The euro dollar, it has nothing to do with Europe. It just means dollars outside of the US, and it took the name euro dollar because of post-World War II, Americans were rebuilding Western Europe. So people wanted dollars. Anyway, if banks want, and banks and really non-banks were the big players in euro dollar markets, primarily money market funds. If they wanted to get a little bit more interest, they could repo a security, and they're actually reverse repoing. That's confusing, but I'll pull up a chart to show you. They're actually the reverse repo. So money market funds have the asset, they have the liquidity, and something like a hedge fund, it's not a bank. It could be a subsidiary of a bank, or like a Lehman, which failed, and they weren't really a bank, investment bank. Mm-hmm. Investment bank, not a traditional bank. If they are the repo party, so that's what Eurodollars are. It's basically, you have securities, but you want a little bit more liquidity. So I'm going to collateralize it. I'm going to put it as a loan, and I'm going to start trading it like cash. The physical security is not like they're wiring it back and forth, but they're trading the balance. The best way, I think, in the Bitcoin land is to say, like, imagine you have an account at Kraken or Coinbase, or who's your sponsor? Gemini. You got an account in Gemini. You want liquidity. Instead of putting more Bitcoin in or something, you're putting in U.S. Treasuries to your balance. So you are adding U.S. Treasuries, and then you can do more stuff. You can short, you can go long more, you can lever. It's more risk. And by the way, notice it's pure rehypothecation of a Treasury bond, by the way. It happens in banking all the time. Again, the free market would catch it better. It happens even more in the regulated system. Basically, you have a Treasury. Who pays interest on a Treasury security? The United States Treasury. They got to pay. And what does that really mean? It means the taxpayer. So the taxpayer pays interest. What happens with the repo? The repo is, well, the repo parties get together, say a money market fund and a hedge fund. They say, let's do a repo. The money market fund takes the reverse position. They have the asset. The hedge fund takes the liability, the repo position. Again, always count money from the liability side. The hedge fund has the liability. There's just, it's a short-term loan, but bottom line is it's called a repo. They are doing it for liquidity purposes on the one side, get a little more interest from the money market fund, and for also liquidity purposes on the liability side. The hedge fund wants to borrow.
So it's lend. Collateral kind of.
Yeah,
it's
collateral.
It's a short-term collateralized loan. Yeah. But the reason you do it is to take on more risk. Yeah. So again, the Treasury pays interest, but then you repo that Treasury further into the market. Someone else is now paying interest on top of it. So the repo party actually still is usually going to be the hedge fund. They'll have the security. They have securities to repo. They say, hey, I got a security. Let me repo it. So they still get some interest from the treasury, but then they got to pay more to the money market fund.
Okay, so
that's how it works.
So when there was a crisis in the repo market and the government was stepping in, why? Because what were they fixing?
That was right here.
If there's no liquidity,
that was right here.
Yeah, who needed the liquidity?
It wasn't. Reserves actually went up here a little bit, but bottom line is the repo market, the yield spiked, so it showed you that something was wrong. So you can see that also. This isn't it. I'm not zooming in the right spot. It was September of 2019. It's right here. You don't see much change in reserves here. Let me pull up a chart with repos to show you.
What is this website? Is this yours?
This is my stuff. Yeah, it's all local. This is what I built for.
Is it all from APIs, or do you manually?
It's a local API, but it's also a local collection of data and everything else.
Does anyone else have access, or just you?
Just me.
You should sell this.
I thought about it. Originally, I was going to do an app and stuff like that, but then you get into licensing. You talk about data collection and all this stuff. So I settled on education for now purposes. Let's see. Maybe you can help me with it.
I'd buy a subscription to this tomorrow.
It's better than Bloomberg. Huh?
Yeah. But this is useful. I mean, we would use this, wouldn't we?
100%.
You should create subscriptions to this.
We can talk about it. I got to deal with licensing and all this, and I have limited resources here, so it's mostly a personal
license in what? What's
endeavor.
The license?
Well, you got to license this. This is High Charts. It's great software, by the way. It's kind of open source, but you'd have to license it if you want to do more than just education. And then there's the data feeds themselves. They get complicated. Like there are plenty of central bank sites, which I do as well. They're generally open, but like if you want to get the price of gold and you want to resell that, you got to license that and all these other things. So it's annoying. I've never fully explored it. I started to with the app, but then I ditched it for this idea. But look, man, this is I can say I'm proud of it. This is what I'm doing, my daily stuff, my pumping now for this show.
Yeah.
My marketing. I do daily shows now on this. I try to keep it more simple. We don't do like hour-long shows. It's like 10, 20 minutes. I'm trying to get it down to 10 minutes.
Tell people where to go for that.
Tangents. So the podcast, it's always been called Crypto Voices. It's still called that, but on YouTube, I've had this brand now for a couple of years. It's Porkopolis. It's named after my hometown, Cincinnati. It was called that in the 1800s. You can tell I like some history stuff. So Porkopolis Economics, it's the same YouTube channel. You can find it there. So here is the repo. I want to get to your question about why that spiked, but let's just look at it really quick. Here's total money supply. And here is repos. Let's take off total money supply so you can see it. This is a liability of the Fed's balance sheet. This is another huge one. It's called the reverse repurchase facility. This is the Federal Reserve now getting involved, to your question, in the repo market. They never really were before. They did repo. Like you can see it goes back here. And this is remember, to count money, you count the liability side of any bank. It doesn't matter if it's a central bank. They have liabilities, the notes and reserves are liability to them, or a commercial bank. Liabilities would be deposits for them. And they used to be banknotes, but that's now forbade. Like, we talked about this, I think it was with you. Scotland, again, free banking tradition. I think still the banks of Scotland in the UK issue different pound notes with different pictures. Yeah,
they do.
That goes back to their tradition of free banking, which is cool. I mean, it's interesting.
Yeah, I made the joke. I was like, those £20 notes are worth £19. Yeah. And this guy's on YouTube's like, what are you fucking on about, you idiot?
All right.
It's just nobody wants one. I've got up there, I can show you, I think I've got a Northern Irish £10 note. Nobody likes them though. They just, when you go into a shop, they're like, what the fuck is this?
Shopkeepers get suspicious.
Yeah, they're like, what is this shit?
This goes back to, all right, this is even a better thing. I just took this chart off. I get to get the discount rate on both things. The etymology of the discount rate is different than even being the lender of last resort. Why the name, the discount rate? This goes back to the free banking that I was telling you about in Europe, but also in China, in the Muslim world. I'm sure it looked like this. I haven't done much research there, but the etymology of the word discount, it literally comes from, you're trying to clear all these balances, right? You got checks going into one bank, checks going into another. They get together at some point. Sometimes they get together at a correspondent bank. Sometimes they'll actually ship coin. The banks are always going to have wholesale rates. They will clear all of these face values of checks, bills of exchange, which again, bills of exchange is actually more popular too. Just think of it as a check that's meant to be out of town, an out of town check. And you don't necessarily need to be a bank to use it. Let's not worry about it too much. So bills of exchange and checks and eventually banknotes. when you're going to clear this stuff finally, and eventually at the central bank, but even before that, when there was no central bank, and this is actually the nature of free banking as well, would you, let's say you come into me at my bank, I'm in Genoa or something, and you come into me from Florence, and you got a check, and it's like 100 Florentines, florin or whatever, I don't know, there's like 50 different denominations. Florin was actually the ounce of gold, but there's like there's like 50 different denominations. Anyway, let's say we want 100 grains would be too much. 300 silver. U.S. used to be on. I'm throwing out way too many facts. The U.S. used to be on a silver standard actually to start. It was 375 grains of silver was $1. That's actually was the definition of dollar. It's about 80% of an ounce. Anyway, let's say 100 grains. 100 grains of gold. You have a check, and it's from the bank in Florence. I'm in Genoa, right? You're a retail customer. You're a merchant, but I know that you're good for it. Like it's a check is good, but what are my choices? The best choice is that I give you an account at my bank. Great. Because then I got the check. And if I ever want to get the gold, I'm safer. Like I'm not, it's better than me giving you gold. I just give you an account. I may even give you a full value discount for that check. Not discount, full value. I just gave away the word. But say I want to give you gold. Am I going to give you the full value, 100 grains of gold for that check?
No, because
definitely not. Because there's risk. This is the definition of banking. And actually, if you read Sidney Homer's The History of Interest Rates, all of the early rates are annualized interpretations of the discount rate. You can decide an interest rate from the discount. So that's a fascinating thing as well.
So the
discount rate is,
So the problem with central banks is they're trying to eliminate risk.
Yeah. So this was the thing. They actually said, even though it's called the discount window, everything went to par with central banking. Federal Reserve notes, checks. In the US, the discounts actually had 3 terms. It all means the same thing. Checks were remittances. You might have heard these terms. Checks were remittances. Bills of exchange were called domestic exchange rates. Again, it's just to think about it as a long distance check. And banknotes themselves, which we understand what they are, the pieces of paper, that was called the discount. So all of them meant the same thing, but the history of that has to do with managing risk. Like this is what a bank does is, look, I might believe that I might have full faith that like this is from that bank, but and it's not such an arbitrary decision. Like there's lots of trade. They know like, okay, it also has a function of distance. Like they know you're, 100 miles away, not so bad. If I as a bank in general want to actually get coin for this 100 grain check, there is some risk. I mean, there's travel risk, everything. And there might be risk that it's a fraudulent check as well. So that's risk too.
So why not let Silicon Valley Bank fail?
It's because it's a central bank and they never want to let anything fail. They should.
They should.
Absolutely, they should have. 100%.
And if they let them fail, yes. I mean, there's political reasons as well because there's impact on...
Yeah. We're long down the road from anything failing. I mean, 2008 has shown us long-term capital management in the 90s. We're long down the road from... They did let Lehman fail, interestingly.
Yeah, but if they'd have let Silicon Valley Bank fail, it's not like Silicon Valley Bank failed with 0 assets. Their assets were actually valued at par, but it was just because they were long duration.
Yeah,
so
that's right. So that's absolutely right.
So they still could. So depositors still could have got their money back. So why not just let it fail? They don't want to let stuff fail. Otherwise, if they did,
because the system is a confidence game
because
they're managing.
But they came in because of failures, and therefore their mandate is to stop failures.
And they always say that this is their time immemorial reason. And again, like I said at the beginning of the show, it's not just banking. They come into any industry with it's the do-gooders on one side, as Milton Friedman said, the unholy alliance of the do-gooders and the special interests on the other. There's absolutely, if you can get a little bit more monopoly, a little bit more monopolistic privilege, come in as a bank, a systemically important bank coming in to take over SVB's assets. That's a much better deal for the SIBs, the systemically important banks, rather than SVB. Let SVB. So the choice is not to let SVB fail or not. It's to give more power to the SIBs, to the SIBs.
So it's okay. Which one of your mates are you going to give this bank to?
Yeah, and that's not. I mean, it's not a conspiracy. Like that is obvious that that's the history of central banking. That's a huge part of it. Absolutely. I mean, I'm glad you brought it up because, like, again, I like this stuff. I like studying it, talking about the markets, but I still view the deepest depths of Dante's Inferno. It's not anything to do with fractional reserve banking or the way it's not fractional reserve banking. It's just banking. This is how banking works. It's a discount rate. There's no mysterious vault that, a middle-class peasant Nothing against middle-class peasants in the Florentine times. But, there's no mysterious vault that they have one coin that they're really looking for. It's the merchants themselves. So I'm a big fan of banking history. Look at that and then look who controls it. That'll tell you things. But the deepest depths of the problem is two things: legal tender and then the control of credit itself, the central bank itself, which controls interest rates. If you didn't have those two things, you would have freedom, but we don't have them. And again, I freely admit, free banking has failed at the hands of the state. It has failed. It's taken over. So this is why we need Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is a new type of base money, which is great. You have it or you don't. But don't confuse Bitcoin with, by the way, any other account here. M1, M2, or M3. By the way, M3 still exists. I've recalculated here. It's not, this is a little plug.
Explain to people M1, M2,
sure,
M3.
Sure. So just to be clear, everything in the blue here is base money. We looked at it before. M0, bankers are, also it's reverse repo. I didn't tell you exactly. It's the Fed getting involved in the repo market. It's a liability. So state money, as I have the title here, state versus bank money. Bitcoin is analogous. I'm not saying Bitcoin is the same thing, but Bitcoin is economically, legally, accounting-wise analogous to base money. You either have it or you don't. It's the core of the system. You can't go deeper. If Lloyd's and NatWest, right, want to settle, they're going to settle in bank reserves. They don't go to a deeper level of money. So when we talk about money, this is base money. Yeah. That's why I'm always on it. And Bitcoin is analogous to that. You can't settle any level deeper than an on-chain UTXO. You just cannot do it. This is a Coinbase account in green. This is a Kraken account. This is a Gemini account. This is a bank account. Everything that is in green, it's an account with some fiduciary. So
I get it.
That's just how it works. Obviously, I don't manage it well. You see it's grown like crazy. Okay, so M1, M2, and 3. M1 is basically demand deposits, only demand deposits. It also includes M0, which a lot of people confuse M0 with the monetary base. M0 is properly defined as just the cash and coin that is not in the vaults of banks. So
in
it's
circulation.
Under people's mattresses, in grocery store tills, in people's wallets.
And they want to...
And that's a lot of money, by the way. That's a lot of money. And by the way, this is also another reason why I'm not so fearful of CBDCs, even though CBDCs are an Orwellian hellscape. And I'm actually doing a CBDC tracker, by the way, with Janine from the This Month in Bitcoin Privacy newsletter. Nick Anthony from the Cato Institute. We're doing
Janine.
Yeah. We're doing a Bitcoin or a CBDC tracker. We're going to try to, show a little Bitcoin history as well for the Human Rights Foundation.
So in Bitcoin world, would you only have base money and B1?
I don't think so. That's my point of all this. Is I think that you will have fiduciary media. Like I said earlier, there's nothing stopping me from lending you a Bitcoin.
Okay, so you would have
three levels. Danny, and Danny lending Emma or anybody else.
Yeah. Okay. Lightning Network, is that still base?
That's a great question. Lightning Network's awesome. Absolutely needs to be used as much as possible. It's not used so much now, like gross number wise, but it's actually an interesting economic question.
Is that like B0?
It's a very good question. You asked the good questions. I don't think there's an economic term for it. Peter Todd, I've used this quote all the time in my presentations. Peter Todd, like way back in 2018, called it a middle ground state. I kind of like that because it's, with this stuff in green, which, dear listeners, just like the highest money supply, it's huge. This is the bank money. Lightning is obviously not like that, right? Because it's locked base money.
Yeah.
That's the key with Lightning. It is locked base money that whatever these things we want to call, I've seen different wallets call them different things, by the way, Lightning, Bitcoin, or whatever. But the Bitcoin that is trading on Lightning, it's not quite a claim, but it's also not quite under your control, like base money Bitcoin. So this is what Peter...
It's still a bearer instrument.
Yeah, but in a different environment than base money Bitcoin. So Peter Todd calls it a middle ground state. I like that definition. I'm open to more suggestions there.
But I can see the argument that it's still just base money.
I think that he's said as well, other people have said this, like there's risk on the Lightning Network. It's a different type of risk.
Well, I was going to say, but the risk is the where we are in the roadmap. It's still considered like, we're still considered early.
Yeah.
They're still figuring things out. There's, there's potential attacks on the Lightning Network.
Yeah.
There's potential flaws. So that's like the risk that it can get stolen. Yeah. So
I think
hold on.
It's a philosophical one too, right? Because it's like when you're I'm not going to go further. You can. I'm just saying. We're still on this topic.
Yeah.
Like if you really want to get down to what is a Bitcoin, I mean, I think the on-chain UTXO that you hold and you validate specifically with your node, where no other state can take it from you. I think that's a different level of Bitcoin than a Lightning. But look, I'm not in a Lightning node or Lightning. Look, I'm going to be very clear. I love anything that happens with Bitcoin, Fediment, Lightning. It's awesome. I'm just saying there's some differences there. And
I want to see this chart as a Bitcoin chart, Bitcoin-based money.
Yeah.
Lightning.
I'm working on it.
Coinbase.
Yeah. Because that's the thing. None of these exchanges, no matter what they say, by the way, are 100% reserve. They're always like, first of all, they trade shit coins. That's another thing you need to understand. That's why exchanges are different than a bank. A bank would lend those deposits further, and it'd be very clear, even though a lot of people like to say it's not clear, it's fraudulent. No, it was very clear. The merchants themselves wanted to do this all the way from the beginning of banking. So just to repeat that. So exchanges are unique right now, and this is a free market thing, right? Exchanges are unique in Bitcoin because they can trade shitcoins. They can make revenue from shitcoin trading, which is a new revenue model that like banks didn't have before. Before it was just interest. And Jesse Powell
isn't
said,
that like Forex trading?
Yeah, but Jesse Powell said as much. He's like, look, I don't really want your Bitcoin. It's a liability for me, because he's being principled about it right now. He could absolutely lend it out. I mean, of course, there's no he could do it. There's nothing stopping him. He could do it, but because of the ethos of Bitcoin, exchanges have not, the good ones, let's say, haven't chosen to not do that. We know the bad ones. We know things have failed.
Legally, could they do it?
Well, that's the thing. There's what regulation is there anyway? I mean, if it was SBF's legislation, he'd be the one to lever it up more than anybody else.
Fuck that guy.
Yeah, but it's open questions still. And this is another thing why, again, free banking, don't just poo-poo it because it was overtaken eventually by state banking. Bitcoin is a very different thing than gold, right?
Yeah.
I didn't finish on gold money. Just one more thing. Then we can, wherever you want to go or end the show, whatever. I know we're going a little bit long. With gold, you would think that more people would want gold. And this goes way back to the Custodia question we didn't answer. Did you know that all of I used to track this with the base money. I haven't done it in a couple quarters. All of the transparent gold and silver holdings in the world, that is every ETF, like a gold money, where it's transparently, they have the gold, they're auditing it twice a quarter, big doors, vaults, the gold is there. 100% reserve gold vaults. Peter Schiff type gold. All of the transparent gold and silver vaults in the world, the Perth Mint, all that stuff, it's not even a fraction of Bitcoin's market cap. It might, I don't remember the exact number. Bitcoin is now, it's over 500 billion, right?
Yeah.
We're not even close there. Now, that doesn't mean there's still about 5 trillion in bullion. There's 5 trillion in jewelry, 5 trillion in bullion. So the LBMA is very not transparent organization. There's old gold holdings there. I'm not including that. I'm saying transparent gold holdings like ETFs, things that you can count up physically, the ounces. It's smaller than Bitcoin's market cap
part
right
of the
now.
Markets.
Right.
Yeah.
Part of the transparent tradable markets. Bitcoin is way surpassed that long ago. So this is why Bitcoin is different and better, and why I think Bitcoin destroys any of the risk of gold. And I give presentations on this all the time. I talked about it at Honey Badger last time. If you were a gold bug in the 70s, you'd be like, it's game on. We are going to win. Gold is going to $850 an ounce from $35 an ounce during the stagflation of the 70s. Americans are trading gold again. Property rights are back. It is game on for gold. And then what happened? Gold hit $850 an ounce in 1980. Paul Volcker pricked the bubble. I don't have the interest rate slide up again. Interest rates crushed the gold market, and also they arguably are selling more gold than they own, but that's another thing. That's a GATA conspiratorial question. But anyway, central banks hold 1/5 of the world's gold. They control gold. This brings me back to the Custodia question. I think it's great. What Custodia is doing, she should do it. She should fight for her legal right to have a full reserve bank, even a bailment is what it's called, right? When you actually, that it's audited, that you're not lending it out. Do it. It's great. Historically, that's not what free banking is. It's never developed that way, but do it. The risk, though, of that is the same for the gold market. The risk of that, the risk we are facing there, I don't necessarily look at it as a win. If you're a Bitcoiner, anywhere in the world, and Caitlin Long gets her master account, again, I love her. I really support what she's doing. like I said, she's been on the show. I want to make very, very clear. I know I'm trying to be nuanced here, but if Custodia gets a master account, like that's a short-term win for Bitcoin. It's going to help with adoption. But that road, we've seen that road always. It leads to centralized control. It happened with gold. It happened even with silver societies. I mean, any society. Centralization is not necessarily, I mean, it's definitely not the good thing in the long term. Maybe in the short term, gets people more involved and everything. So this is why you always have to have the ability to withdraw. And presumably, not presumably, we know that you would be able to do that with a Custodia type setup. But at what point does that get turned off? At what point does Caitlin Long retire from the board? 20 years down the line after that, maybe a crisis occurs. Maybe we're going to need to turn off withdrawals for a week. Like, this is why free banking doesn't work in a regulated sense. So I am specifically talking about free banking in a no central bank, no regulation society. Yep. I know that it's failed. Fiat has always taken it over. But I think with Bitcoin, we absolutely have a chance to, it's that whack-a-mole where it can be everywhere. And I'm not talking about a regulated structure. I'm just talking about, it's really what exchanges are right now. Why do we have exchanges? It's the easiest way to trade Bitcoin. Some people leave the Bitcoin on, some people not. We got to educate, do all that. But I one more thing on this point. I really liked, I watched Sergey's interview. I like Sergey in general.
Yeah, I like Sergey.
He made this point many times. He's like, at what point are we going to see this Bitcoin standard emerge? I believe it's going to happen. This is what I'm trying to prepare for. You're trying to prepare for. We're trying to educate on. But, is there going to be any loans? Are we not going to make loans anymore? These are the types of questions.
We debated it yesterday.
Yeah.
We're like, of course you're still going to lend each other money.
I just demonstrated how easy it is to make a loan. It's impossibly easy to make a loan.
You need credit.
I agree with you.
To do things. I needed credit to buy this house. I needed credit to start my first business. I needed it. It would not have happened.
Yeah.
And like that credit might be different. Like my first house, I went to my dad. I borrowed £5,000. And so that wasn't a bank loan, but it was still credit.
Yeah.
And, maybe it's peer-to-peer credit. Maybe it's between your friends, but you're always going to have credit.
100% agree. I got one more point. I don't know if you guys got anything else.
Well, the other thing we want to do with CBDCs, but I think we've 2 hours 10 minutes. I think we're just going to have to revisit that again. Are you going to be a honey badger?
Oh yeah, for sure. That's my neighborhood.
We'll do it then.
Good.
Are you going to be a honey badger?
When's that?
September.
I already spoke to you about
September, October. Yeah. Just one final point.
Pre-Australia. That's where I'm going before Australia. Imagine that. Our first Australia trip, you have to fly to Latvia to pick me up.
That would really annoy me. Yeah, I'll do it. Let's go.
I don't know how you do it, Danny. I really don't, but it's impressive.
He's young, that's why.
Actually, I got to go back to where's TMS? DC TMS? There it is. So I was on the chart. Just remember that interest rates were 20%. This is another thing where the full reservists, they don't understand that legislation can be damning. It's just not necessarily where you want to look. Really quick, you see this line? This is the sacred demand deposit. This is what the full reserves say. We all need full reserves. Even though the fungibility of money has never worked this way, the sacred demand deposit, this is a percent of total money. Where has it been going from the 60s to the eve of the financial crisis?
Down.
And what is the percentage on the eve of the financial crisis? You see, it's the last one on the tooltip there. 6.4% is even the full reservists who really want to make a big deal about all this stuff, they will admit, like, lending money's fine, but it should be a savings account, a time deposit, something where it's clear that it's an interest. They don't, but the demand deposit, that's something sacred about that. How do you explain the global financial crisis if the demand deposit was, as a percentage of total money, 44% in the 60s? And on the eve of the financial crisis, let's not worry about what happened after, that's money printing, but on the eve of the financial crisis, it was 6% of the total money supply. Well, you remember I don't have these charts mixed, but you remember in 1980, the interest rates were 20%. There was another type of legislation that was massively influencing bank deposits at that time. It's called Regulation Q. It's still in effect. There are limits that the government sets on the charging of interest. Goes back to our interest discussion before, which is totally bad. It's not market. On demand deposits, on savings accounts, and on time deposits, they put limits on how much banks could give even to their deposit holders, how much they could pay. They put limits. And so what happened was you actually had, let me just put these two money supplies here. what happened is you got away from M1. You see how small it is, and you got into M2 and M3. I didn't finish the full. There are many different things, but the big thing there is money market funds. And money market funds were a non-bank entity that started precisely at this time in the 80s because people wanted the interest. They saw how much banks were getting in interest, 15%, but they couldn't get that. Like depositors were limited. Regulation Q, they were limited like 5.5% for the demand deposits. So they went into money market funds. And lo and behold, what happens, not even 20 some years later, Blythe Masters and the rest of the financial engineering, mortgage-backed securities purchased by money market funds.
So is that like the blurring of mortgage-backed securities being used like money?
Yeah, it's a different type of money. It's like, think of a stable coin. What do we say about the church, right? The church said this about their lenders, that they always find a way to get around the rules. And they do that the best in banking. They have their rules and they'll get away, and they'll probably get around the rules with very unfavorable consequences that might not even be seen for decades. And the money market fund market, Lehman, money market fund holder, big time for their depositors. A lot of money market funds, they had these mortgage-backed securities, CDOs, a lot of problems, and they failed or had to be bailed out.
Matt, amazing, unbelievable. We could stay all fucking day doing this, but I love this because I've learned something today. I kind of had something click into place what I didn't really understand about the relationship between banks and central banks. I did want to do CBDCs with you, but we can't do it. But look, we'll be at Honey Badger. We'll do it then. We'll
Absolutely.
find the time. Where do you want to send people again? Tell them where to go.
Poor Godless Economics is the YouTube. On Spotify, you can still see the videos. That's still the Crypto Voices podcast. My branding's not exactly completely thought through, but both brands I am very happy with, and I've been working for a long time on it. So if I can help you guys educate yourselves on money, and again, I think it's about the history just as much as anything. I think that's the most interesting thing. So I do some dailies like this on YouTube.
Go check them out. That was amazing. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
Thank you.